1/3 of John's Gospel covers a single week, 7 chapters out of 21. John watched Jesus turn water into wine. He watched him raise Lazarus from a tomb. He watched 3 years of signs and wonders that drew thousands from every corner of the empire. And when he sat down to write it all, he gave 1/3 of everything to 7 days. Whatever happened in that week, John believed nothing else in 3 years of miracle came close. Tonight, you are going to hear the Easter story in a way you have never heard it before. The Hebrew hidden beneath the Greek. The archaeology buried beneath the theology. The connections across 4,000 years of Scripture that most people are never shown. You do not need to stay awake for all of it. If you drift off after 20 minutes or after 2 hours, the story will be here tomorrow night. Let it settle into you. Your only task is to rest. But I will tell you this. By the end of tonight, you will know why a hostile Jewish source recorded 4 unexplainable signs in the temple around 30 CE. You will know the single Greek word that means both betrayal and love. And you will hear the sound of a charcoal fire on a beach that changes everything you thought you knew about failure. Before we begin, I need 60 seconds, because what you are about to hear tonight is not just a YouTube video. It is a preview of something I have been building for over a year. It is called Sleep Bible App, and it already exists. You can try it right now at sleepbible.app. Open it on your phone. Sign in. Tap on any book in the Bible. And as the narrator begins to read, every verse comes alive with cinematic imagery that looks like it came from a $100 million biblical epic. Verse by verse, scene by scene, with gentle ambient sound wrapping around you as you drift off to sleep inside the Word of God. And what you are about to hear tonight, this deep dive into the passion and resurrection of Jesus Christ, every hidden Hebrew meaning, every archaeological discovery, every connection across Scripture. This kind of experience is coming to the app for every major character and event in the Bible. The Passion, David, Abraham, Moses, Elijah. Not summaries, not devotionals, full cinematic journeys with the deeper meanings most people never discover. I have spent over $100,000 building this. No investors, no venture capital, just me and a conviction that this is what God asked me to build. To fund the completion of the iOS app, the Android app, and the cinematic imagery for all 66 books, I created a founding member offer. Lifetime access. One payment. Every book. Every character deep dive. Every narrator. Every feature we ever build. No subscription. Ever. Only 1,000 spots will ever exist. When they are gone, this offer disappears permanently. Go to sleepbible.app/founder. It is in the pinned comment. It is in the description. Take 30 seconds and see what we have built. And whether you become a founding member or not, every dollar goes directly into building what I just described. No middleman. This is a ministry, not a corporation. I will not let you down. Okay. It is Sunday morning in Jerusalem. The year is approximately 33 CE, and 2 processions are entering the city from opposite sides at the same hour. From the west, a Roman governor rides in with war horses, armor, and the full military machinery of an empire that has crucified thousands. From the east, on a borrowed donkey that has never been ridden. A carpenter from Nazareth descends the Mount of Olives, surrounded by peasants, waving palm branches and shouting a word that happens to be the root of his own name. 2 kingdoms, 2 processions, 1 city that has no idea what it is about to witness. Let's begin. 2 parades, same morning, same city. From the west gate, the Roman governor Pontius Pilate rides into Jerusalem on a war horse. Behind him, a column of cavalry, iron helmets catching the morning sun, the percussion of hooves on stone, shields on leather, the synchronized march of an empire that has crushed every rebellion it has ever faced. Pilate enters Jerusalem every Passover because Passover is dangerous. Josephus records a single incident under the governor Cumanus, where a Roman soldier's obscene gesture sparked a stampede that killed 20,000 people. Passover brings 2.5 million pilgrims into a city built for 40,000. One spark, and the whole thing burns. Therefore, Pilate rides in with steel, but from the east, from the Mount of Olives, through the Kidron Valley, another procession is forming. And this one has no soldiers, no horses, no iron. A man is sitting on a borrowed donkey. The animal has never been ridden before. The road is steep, cut into limestone, and the clatter of the colt's hooves on the uneven path sounds nothing like the synchronized march entering from the west. The crowd is growing. They are pulling branches from the palm trees along the road and spreading them on the ground ahead of him. Others are stripping off their outer cloaks and laying them in the dust. The smell of crushed palm fronds mixes with the dry limestone dust kicked up by hundreds of feet. And they are shouting. The words come from Psalm 118, verse 25. Hoshiana, save now, save us, please. This is political street theater at the most volatile moment of the year, because Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9 had laid out the script 500 years earlier. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey. Every literate person in that crowd knows what a man on a donkey means. But Zechariah 9 is a single oracle. Verse 10, the verse nobody quotes at Palm Sunday, says this: I will take away the chariots from Ephraim and the war horses from Jerusalem. The donkey is not a humble alternative to a horse. The donkey is a declaration of war against the logic of horses, against Rome, against every empire that believes power comes from the edge of a sword. And here is where it gets remarkable. Most people know 1 or 2 prophecies from Zechariah. The donkey, maybe the 30 pieces of silver. But if you sit down and read Zechariah chapters 9 through 14, all 6 chapters in sequence, you find something staggering. A single Old Testament book, written 5 centuries before the events, contains the entire screenplay of Passion Week. The donkey ride, the betrayal price of 30 silver coins, the disposal of the money in the temple, the striking of the shepherd and the scattering of the sheep, the piercing, the fountain of cleansing opened for sin, the feet standing on the Mount of Olives. 1 book, 1 prophet, 500 years before a single nail was forged. That is not a collection of scattered predictions. That is a script. And the man on the donkey is walking into the opening scene. But the timing is even more precise than the script. In the book of Daniel, chapter 9, the angel Gabriel delivers a prophecy with a mathematical countdown. 69 weeks of years, 483 years, from the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince. And then Gabriel says, the anointed one will be cut off. The Hebrew word is kareth, covenant execution language. Violent, final. The scholar Harold Hoehner, working from Artaxerxes' decree in 444 BC, calculated 173,880 days, 483 prophetic years of 360 days each. The countdown lands on a single day, Nisan 10, AD 33, March 30th. The triumphal entry. Robert Anderson, working independently with different methodology in the 19th century, arrived at the same number, 173,880 days. The man on the donkey did not stumble into Jerusalem on a random afternoon. He arrived on the exact day the clock ran out. And 4 days later, as Daniel's prophecy required, the anointed one was cut off. Let that settle for a moment. A 500-year-old screenplay, a 483-year countdown, both converging on one road, one animal, one afternoon in a city crammed with pilgrims who have no idea that the psalm they are shouting contains the man's own name. Because that is the detail almost nobody hears. The crowd is shouting, Hoshiana, save now. And Hoshia is the imperative form of the Hebrew verb yasha, to save. It is the same root that gives us the name Yeshua, Jesus, the name that the angel told Mary to give her son. You shall call him Yeshua, for he will save his people from their sins. So the crowd lining the road, throwing their cloaks in the dust, waving palm branches that still carry the scent of the grove, they are shouting the meaning of his name at him. Hoshiana, save now. Save, we pray. They are calling on the God of Israel to send salvation, and the word for salvation is walking past them on a donkey. They do not know what they are saying. They think they are quoting a psalm. They think they are welcoming a political liberator, a second Judas Maccabeus, who will drive out Rome the way Simon Maccabeus drove out the Greeks. First Maccabees, chapter 13, records that when Simon liberated the temple, the people entered with praise and palm branches. This crowd is deliberately reenacting that moment. They expect this man to do what the Maccabees did. He will not. And at the peak of the procession, at the moment of highest public acclamation, Jesus does something no conquering hero has ever done. He weeps. Luke uses the Greek word eklauson, which does not mean quiet tears. It means audible, convulsive sobbing. The man the crowd is calling king stops the parade and sobs over the city. If you had known, even you, in this your day, the things that make for your peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. He sees what they cannot see. Within this generation, the Romans under Titus will burn this city to the ground. The walls will be torn down. The temple will be reduced to its foundation stones. Josephus will record that 1,100,000 people died in the siege. The crowd is waving palms for a military messiah. The man on the donkey is weeping because he knows they are asking for the wrong salvation. And there is another layer hiding in the grammar. Luke chapter 19, verse 40. The Pharisees tell Jesus to silence his followers. He responds, "If they keep quiet, the stones themselves will cry out." In Aramaic, the word for children is banim, and the word for stones is abanim. The two words are nearly identical. John the Baptist had already made this pun. God can raise up children, banim, from these stones, abanim. The wordplay would have been immediately apparent to every Aramaic speaker in that crowd. The stones and the children are the same word. And before we leave the parade, there is one more thread hiding in this man's origin. Matthew chapter 2, verse 23 says that the prophets declared he shall be called a Nazarene. Critics have spent centuries pointing out that this exact phrase appears nowhere in the Old Testament. No prophet ever wrote, "He shall be called a Nazarene." But Hebrew linguists noticed something the critics missed. The Hebrew word for branch, the messianic title in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1, is netzer, and the consonants of Nazareth, Nasrat, are nearly identical to the consonants of netzer. Matthew is not quoting a single verse. He is making a phonetic and theological argument. The man from the obscure, despised village of Nazareth is the prophesied branch of David. The town name and the title share the same root. So when the crowd sees the sign above Pilate's head 5 days from now, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, they will read a place name. But in Hebrew, the sign reads, Jesus the branch, King of the Jews. The prophecy was always in the name. They just were not listening carefully enough to hear it. After the procession, Jesus enters the temple, and the contrast is violent. The man who just wept over the city picks up a cord, overturns the tables of the money changers, and drives out the merchants selling sacrificial animals. Coins scatter across the stone floor. Cages crash. Doves burst free into the open air. The sound of metal on marble, of panicked animals, of a teacher shouting words from the prophets, fills the court of the Gentiles. He quotes two scriptures. From Isaiah, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations." And from Jeremiah, "But you have made it a den of robbers." Now, here is what almost every sermon gets wrong about that phrase. A den of robbers is not where robbers rob. It is where robbers hide. Go back to Jeremiah chapter 7. The context is unmistakable. The people of Jerusalem were committing injustice, exploiting the vulnerable, breaking the covenant, and then walking into the temple and saying, "We are delivered." They were using the temple as a hideout, a place to launder their guilt, a religious safe house where injustice could hide behind ritual. Jesus is not angry because people are selling doves. He is angry because the entire temple system has become the place where exploitation hides behind the appearance of holiness. And here is what holds all of this together. The psalm the crowd was singing. Psalm 118. Hoshiana, the psalm that opened the week on the road from the Mount of Olives. This same psalm will appear again. On Thursday night, after the Last Supper, Matthew records that Jesus and his disciples sang a hymn before walking to the Garden of Gethsemane. The scholarly consensus, from John Owen to Leon Morris to the first century sources themselves, is clear. The hymn was the conclusion of the Hallel, the traditional Passover liturgy. The final psalm in the Hallel is Psalm 118. The same psalm the crowd shouted on Sunday, Jesus sang on Thursday night, walking toward his arrest. Psalm 118, verse 17. I shall not die, but I shall live and recount the deeds of the Lord. He sang those words hours before he died. Remember that psalm. It appears at the beginning of the week and at the end. It is the frame. And what happens inside the frame will change your understanding of every word in it. 2 parades entered Jerusalem that morning. One carried the power of Rome. The other carried the weight of 500 years of prophecy, 483 years of countdown, and a name that meant salvation. The empire entered from the west with war horses. The kingdom entered from the east on a donkey. And to this day, the only one anyone remembers is the man who wept. If you are lying in the dark tonight carrying something heavy, something that feels like it will never resolve, hold this image. A man riding into the most dangerous city on earth, weeping over people who do not understand what he is about to do for them. He sees you the way he saw Jerusalem, not as a problem to be solved, but as someone worth weeping over. The crowd has shouted, "Save now!" the meaning of his name. But in 2 days, a widow will walk into the very temple he has just cleansed. She will drop her last 2 coins into a treasury chest, and Jesus will not praise her for her generosity. He will grieve, because the system that takes everything from the most vulnerable is still standing, and the den where robbers hide is about to consume her too. You know the widow who gave her 2 coins. You have heard 1,000 sermons about her sacrifice. The faithful woman, the model of generosity, giving everything she had to God. But read the 6 verses before the story. Mark chapter 12, verses 38 through 40. Jesus has just said, in the hearing of the entire crowd, "Beware of the scribes. They like to walk around in long robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely. Beware of the scribes. They devour widows' houses." And then, in the very next sentence, a widow drops her last 2 coins into the temple treasury. She has just been devoured. Now pause, because what you just heard probably contradicts everything you have been taught about this story. The scholar Addison Wright, in a 1981 paper in the Catholic Biblical Quarterly, argued that Jesus is not praising the widow. He is lamenting her. Elizabeth Struthers Malbon reached the same conclusion independently. Read the passage again. Jesus does not say, "Go and do likewise." He does not hold her up as an example. He simply observes. She put in everything she had, her whole life. And then, in the very next verse, Mark chapter 13, verse 1, Jesus walks out of the temple and says, "Not one stone here will be left on another." The temple that just took her last coin will be rubble within a generation. She gave everything she had to a system that was already condemned. And the man who watched her do it was not impressed. He was grieving. Let that reframe settle. The widow is not the hero of the story. She is the evidence. Evidence that the temple system, the system Jesus had overturned tables to condemn just 2 days earlier, was still functioning exactly as designed, taking everything from the most vulnerable and calling it devotion. The den where robbers hide had just consumed her. But the temple confrontations of that week are not finished. On Tuesday, the teaching intensifies. The Pharisees try to trap him with a question about taxes. The Sadducees try to humiliate him with a hypothetical about the resurrection. A scribe asks him, which commandment is the greatest? Every encounter is a test, and every test fails. He answers each one with a precision that silences the room. And then, in the middle of this gauntlet, something unexpected happens. A group of Greeks arrives. Not Jews, Greeks, Gentiles, outsiders. They approach Philip, one of the disciples with a Greek name, and they make a simple request. Sir, we wish to see Jesus. Philip tells Andrew. Andrew and Philip together tell Jesus. And his response makes no sense. He does not say, bring them in. He does not say, not now. He says, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. To understand why that sentence is so shocking, you need to know what the hour means in John's Gospel. John has been tracking this phrase like a countdown. At the wedding in Cana, his mother pushes him to act. He says, my hour has not yet come. In chapter 7, no one seized him because his hour had not yet come. In chapter 8, the same. Again and again, the hour is approaching but has not arrived. For 12 chapters, the clock is ticking. And the trigger, the moment when Jesus finally says, the hour has come, is not a threat or a confrontation or a betrayal. It is Greeks asking to see him. The Gentiles have arrived. The mission is no longer contained within Israel. And the moment the message breaks beyond the boundary of one nation, the cross becomes inevitable. Because the only way the grain of wheat feeds the world is if it falls into the ground and dies. He says this in the next breath. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. The Greeks triggered the hour. The hour is the cross. And then Jesus says something in John chapter 12, verse 32, that contains one of the most brilliant double meanings in all of Scripture. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. The Greek word is hypsu, and it means two things simultaneously: to lift up physically and to exalt, to glorify. John uses this word 3 times in his gospel, and every time, both meanings are alive. John chapter 3. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. John chapter 8. When you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am. And here, chapter 12. When I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people. John even adds an editorial note in the next verse. He said this to show by what kind of death he was going to die. The crucifixion is the exaltation. The lowest point in human history is the highest glory in the universe. The cross is simultaneously a Roman execution device and a divine throne. And the image behind it all is the bronze serpent in the wilderness. The image of the curse, lifted up on a pole, and anyone who looked at it was healed. The Son of Man will be lifted up the same way, and everyone who looks will live. So in the span of a single Tuesday, a widow gives her last coins to a doomed temple. Greeks arrive and trigger the hour of the cross. And Jesus describes his own death as a simultaneous execution and enthronement. The temple is condemned. The hour has come. And the one condemning the temple is walking toward a death that will make the temple unnecessary. Now I need to introduce you to a passage that will haunt every chapter that follows, from the Last Supper to the empty tomb. Isaiah chapter 52, verse 13, through chapter 53, verse 12. 15 verses, written approximately 700 years before Jesus was born. 500 years before crucifixion as a method of execution was invented. It describes a man despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, a man who bore the sickness of others and was pierced for their transgressions, a man who was silent before his accusers, like a lamb led to slaughter, a man who was buried with the rich in his death, a man who, after suffering, sees the light of life and is satisfied. Every detail maps onto the Passion narrative with a precision that has staggered readers for millennia. But there is something about this passage that most people are never told, and it changes how you hear the entire story. Before the 11th century, every known Jewish commentary that addresses Isaiah 53 identifies the servant as an individual, specifically as the Messiah. Everyone. The Babylonian Talmud in Sanhedrin 98b calls the Messiah the leprous one, because, as the text says, surely he has borne our sicknesses. Midrash Ruth Rabbah, commenting on Ruth chapter 2, refers to the Messiah's chastisements, quoting Isaiah 53, verse 5. The Targum Jonathan, the ancient Aramaic paraphrase of the prophets, opens Isaiah 52, verse 13, with the words, "Behold, my servant, the Messiah, shall prosper." The Targum says it explicitly, "My servant, the Messiah." Even Rabbi Moshe Al-Shich, writing in the 16th century, acknowledged, "Our rabbis, with one voice, accept and affirm the opinion that the prophet is speaking of King Messiah. With one voice, for over 1,000 years. And then, suddenly, they stopped. Rashi, the most influential Jewish commentator in history, writing in the year 1105 in the aftermath of the First Crusade massacres of 1096, was the first major commentator to systematically identify the servant not as the Messiah, but as the nation of Israel, a suffering people, not a suffering individual, a collective reading, not a messianic one. And here is the astonishing detail. Even Rashi, in his own commentary on the Talmud on Sanhedrin 98a, endorsed the messianic reading. He wrote, "He is even stricken himself, as it is written, and he was pierced because of our transgressions." The same scholar who redirected the passage away from the Messiah in his public commentary quietly affirmed the messianic reading in his Talmud notes. The question is not whether Isaiah 53 describes the Messiah. For 1,000 years, no one debated that. The question is why, after 1,000 years of consensus, the reading changed. And the answer is not theological. The answer is historical. The Crusades. A wave of violence committed in the name of Christ made the messianic reading of Isaiah 53 intolerable for the very people whose ancestors had written it. But the text remains, and it says things that resist any collective reading. Isaiah 53, verse 4, We esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. Who is the we, and who is the him? If the servant is Israel, who is doing the esteeming? The nations. Then Isaiah is saying, the nations watched Israel suffer and concluded God was punishing them. But verse 5 says, He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Now the suffering is substitutionary. Someone else's punishment, borne by one. Verse 9. His grave was assigned with the wicked, yet with the rich in his death. A nation does not have a single grave, but a man does. A man crucified between criminals and buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Verse 10. He shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. A dead man who sees offspring and lives again. That is not a metaphor for national survival. That is a description of resurrection, written 700 years before it happened. This passage will come back. When the soldiers scourge him, you will hear Isaiah 53. When Pilate presents him to the crowd, you will hear it. When he falls silent before his accusers, you will hear it. When they assign his grave with the wicked and lay him in a rich man's tomb, the words will already be waiting. Isaiah 53 is the lens through which the entire Passion was designed to be read. And for 1,000 years, the people who wrote it agreed. And there is one more voice that speaks during this week. A hostile voice. A voice that had no interest in supporting the claims of Jesus or his followers. The Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 43a, preserves this. On the eve of Passover, they hung Yeshu the Nazarene, and the herald went out before him for 40 days, saying, Yeshu the Nazarene will go out to be stoned for sorcery and misleading and enticing Israel to idolatry. The Talmud does not deny that Jesus existed. It does not deny that he was executed. It does not deny the timing, the eve of Passover, exactly as the Gospels record. And it does not deny that he performed extraordinary signs. It recharacterizes them. What the Gospels call miracles, the Talmud calls sorcery. But the underlying fact is the same. Something happened that required explanation. His enemies did not say, nothing happened. They said, it was dark magic. When your opponent's best argument is, the miracles were sorcery, the miracles are not in dispute. 3 threads from 1 week. A widow consumed by the system that was supposed to protect her. An ancient text that every Jewish scholar for 1,000 years said described the Messiah, and a hostile Talmudic source that confirms the miracles by trying to explain them away. The temple stands condemned. The hour has arrived, and the passage that will interpret everything that follows has been waiting for 700 years in the scroll of Isaiah. If you are drifting, let that image carry you. A scroll, unrolled in a synagogue, the ink 7 centuries old, describing wounds that have not yet been inflicted on a man who has not yet been born. The words are patient. They have been patient for a very long time. Tomorrow night, the story moves to an upper room. A meal, a broken loaf, a cup that Jesus will call my blood of the covenant, and a gesture so radical, so beneath the dignity of a rabbi, that Peter will refuse to let it happen. A basin of water, a towel, and a teacher on his knees, washing the feet of the man who will betray him. She broke the neck of the jar, not opened, destroyed. The flask was alabaster, long-necked, designed to release perfume in single drops over months, even years. It contained pure nard, an aromatic resin imported from the Himalayas. Mark tells us it was worth 300 denarii. A denarius was a day's wage for a laborer. 300 denarii was a full year of work. She shattered the neck and poured the entire contents over his head. The fragrance flooded the room, soaking into his hair, running down his face, pooling in the folds of his clothing. Everyone in Bethany could smell it. The oil would still be in his skin when he was arrested. The disciples were angry. "Why this waste?" they said. "This could have been sold and given to the poor." And Jesus said something that has echoed for 2,000 years. "She has done a beautiful thing to me." Wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. The only individual act Jesus ever promised would be proclaimed alongside the gospel itself. And in Mark and Matthew, her name is not even recorded. The jar could never be resealed. She did not give a portion. She gave everything, irreversibly. That is the tone of this chapter. Jars will be broken. Bread will be broken. A man will be broken. And none of it can be undone. The sun is setting over Jerusalem. It is Thursday, Nisan 14. And in an upper room somewhere in the city, 13 men recline around a low table, not seated, reclining. On their left sides, propped on cushions, eating with their right hands. Because in the ancient world, slaves ate standing. Free people sat. But on Passover night, even the poorest Jew in Israel was required to recline, because reclining was the posture of royalty. On this night, every person at the table was a king. The room smells of roasted lamb, unleavened bread, bitter herbs. Oil lamps flicker against the walls. Somewhere outside, in the temple courts, the priests are slaughtering the Passover lambs. The sound of 10,000 animals dying carries on the evening air. Inside this room, the true lamb is reclining at the head of the table. For 1,500 years, every Jewish family has gathered on this night to remember the night God brought them out of Egypt. The Seder is a liturgy. It has a specific structure, specific cups, specific prayers. And tonight, Jesus is about to take that ancient structure and break it open from the inside. The Passover Seder is built around 4 cups of wine. Each cup corresponds to one of 4 promises God made in Exodus chapter 6. I will bring you out. I will deliver you. I will redeem you. I will take you as my people. The first cup, the cup of sanctification, is drunk at the opening of the meal. The second, the cup of deliverance, comes after the story of the Exodus is retold. And the third cup, drunk after the meal, is called the cup of redemption. It represents the promise, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. Luke records 2 cups at the Last Supper, one before the meal and one after. Paul, writing to the Corinthians, calls the Eucharistic cup the cup of blessing, which is the traditional Jewish name for the third cup, the cup of redemption. Jesus lifts the third cup. He says, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. The cup that for 1,500 years had represented God's redemption of Israel from Egypt, now represents a new redemption. The outstretched arm is His, and the blood is His own. But there is a cup missing. The fourth cup, the cup of consummation, was traditionally drunk after the singing of the Hallel Psalms. It completed the Seder. It represented God's final promise. I will take you as my people. The Gospels record that after the third cup, Jesus made a vow. I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Then they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. No fourth cup. The scholar Brant Peter argues that this was deliberate. Jesus left the Passover unfinished. The Seder was not complete. The lamb had not yet been sacrificed. And the fourth cup, Peter contends, was finally drunk on the cross. When Jesus said, I thirst, and received sour wine on a hyssop branch, the same herb used to paint lamb's blood on the door frames in Egypt, He declared, It is finished. Tetelestai. The Passover that began in an upper room was completed on a hill. The fourth cup was the cross. There is a Seder beginning in an upper room. The first cup has been poured. The story of the Exodus has been told, and the bread is about to be broken. Hold that image. A room lit by oil lamps. 13 men reclining. Bread, wine, the smell of lamb, and a man about to explain what his death means by performing it as a meal. In the Passover Seder, 3 pieces of unleavened bread are stacked together. During the meal, the middle piece is removed, broken in half. The larger half is wrapped in a linen cloth, hidden somewhere in the room, and after the meal, children search for it. When it is found, it is redeemed, bought back with a small gift. This piece is called the afikoman. It is the last food eaten at the Passover. The sequence is broken, wrapped, hidden, found, redeemed. The Jewish scholar David Daub at Oxford argued that the term afikoman derives from the Greek afikomenos, meaning the coming one, and that this ritual predates the first rabbinic mention by decades. Melito of Sardis used the same term as a Passover symbol for Jesus in the year 170, before the Mishnah even recorded the word. And the matzah itself, unleavened, striped from baking, pierced with holes to prevent rising, broken, wrapped, hidden, found. Jesus holds this bread. He says, This is my body, which is broken for you. He is holding a piece of bread that has already enacted the pattern. Broken, wrapped, hidden, found. He is about to live it. The room is quiet. The bread has been broken. The cup has been shared. And then Jesus says something that freezes every man at the table. One of you will betray me. John records that the disciples look at each other, uncertain who he means. Peter nudges John, who is reclining next to Jesus, and whispers, Ask him who it is. John leans back against Jesus and asks, and Jesus answers with a gesture, not a word. He dips a piece of bread in the dish and hands it to someone. In first-century Palestinian culture, for the host to dip a morsel and offer it to a guest was an act of honor. It was a mark of intimacy and friendship. The same gesture appears in Ruth chapter 2. When Boaz extends food to Ruth, as a sign of welcome and protection. Jesus' last gesture toward Judas was an act of love. Now pay attention to what John records, because the grammar matters. John chapter 13, verse 2. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas to betray him. Before the supper, before the bread, the thought was already there. Temptation. John chapter 13, verse 27. After Judas receives the morsel, Satan entered into him. Temptation became invitation. Invitation became possession. The yielding was gradual. John does not describe a man seized by a sudden external force. He describes a man who opened the door, 1 inch at a time, until the door could not be closed. And this is what makes Judas tragic rather than monstrous. He followed Jesus for 3 years. He heard every sermon. He witnessed every miracle. He was trusted with the group's finances. He was close enough that when Jesus said, "One of you will betray me," no one looked at Judas. They looked at themselves. The betrayer hid in plain sight for 3 years. And when he finally walked out the door, the other 11 assumed he was going to buy supplies for the festival or give money to the poor. John records the moment with devastating economy. Judas takes the morsel. He stands from the table. He walks to the door. And John writes 3 words that carry more theology than most sermons. It was night. That is not a weather report. All through his gospel, John has been building a case. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. I am the light of the world. Light and darkness in John are not metaphors. They are categories. They are kingdoms. And Judas, having received the bread, having heard the voice, having been offered love in the form of a dipped morsel, walks out of the presence of the light of the world and into the dark. It was night. The door closes behind him. The lamplight shrinks, and the room is smaller now, by 1. After Judas leaves, the room changes. The tension breaks, and Jesus begins to teach. But before the teaching, Matthew and Mark record something that circles back to an image from the very first chapter. They sang a hymn. The scholarly consensus is clear. The hymn was the conclusion of the Hallel, the second half of the Passover liturgy. Psalms 115 through 118. The same Psalm 118 that the crowd shouted on Sunday, Hoshiana, is the final psalm Jesus sings on Thursday night, walking out of the upper room toward the Mount of Olives. Psalm 118, verse 17. I shall not die, but I shall live and recount the deeds of the Lord. He sang those words hours before he died. Remember, in chapter 1 I said to hold on to that psalm. It opened the week. It closes the supper. And it is not finished yet. Psalm 118 will appear one more time at the end. An alabaster jar is in fragments on the floor. The bread has been broken and shared. The cup has been lifted and poured. The betrayer has walked into the night. And the remaining 11 have just finished singing a psalm about a man who will not die. If the details are starting to blur, if you are drifting, let this image carry you. A table in lamplight, bread, wine, the scent of nard still in the air from 2 nights ago. A man who knows he has 12 hours to live, offering his last meal as a covenant. There is nothing to hold on to tonight except the bread he broke and the cup he poured. That is enough. The hymn is over. The door opens. The night air of Jerusalem carries the smell of lamb and smoke from the temple fires. They descend the stone steps into the street and begin walking east, toward the Kidron Valley, toward a garden called Gethsemane. The name means oil press, the place where olives are crushed until the oil flows out. The Anointed One is walking to the place of crushing. And in that garden, he will pray a prayer so agonizing that his sweat will fall like drops of blood. There is a hierarchy of servitude in first-century Judaism. At the top, a hired servant, a free man working for wages. Below him, a Hebrew slave, a debtor working off a debt, protected by Mosaic law. Below him, a Gentile slave with fewer legal protections. And at the very bottom of this hierarchy, below servants, below Jewish slaves, below everyone, there is one task so degrading that Jewish law explicitly exempted Jewish slaves from performing it. Washing feet. The roads of Palestine were unpaved, dusty in summer, muddy in winter, shared with animals. Sandaled feet arrived at every meal caked in filth. Someone had to wash them. But the rabbis ruled that a Jewish slave could not be compelled to do it. Only a Gentile slave, or a wife, or a child, or a student doing it voluntarily for his rabbi. On the night before he died, Jesus rose from the table, took off his outer garment, wrapped a towel around his waist, poured water into a basin, and knelt on the floor, and began to wash feet. Picture it. The room is still warm from the meal. The bread has been broken. The cup has been shared. The smell of nard from the anointing 2 nights ago has faded, but the oil lamps are burning, throwing soft light across the walls. And the teacher, the rabbi, the one they call Lord, is on his knees with a basin of water and a towel. This scene appears only in John's Gospel, where Matthew, Mark, and Luke record Jesus breaking the bread and saying, "This is my body." John records the foot washing instead. It is not an accident. John is making a theological substitution. The one who will soon be stripped naked and hung on a cross first strips himself voluntarily. The one who will be pierced kneels to touch the dirtiest part of a human body. John is dramatizing the incarnation and the cross in miniature. God descending, God touching, God bearing what is beneath him. He moves from one disciple to the next. The sound of water poured over feet, the feel of rough hands, a carpenter's hands, wiping the dust away. No one speaks. John records no conversation, no narration of the other 11 reactions. Just silence as each man submits to something none of them can process. Until Jesus reaches Peter. Peter refuses. "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" The Greek verb order reveals horror, not politeness. The emphasis falls on you and my. You, the Messiah, are going to wash my feet. Peter's objection is not about getting dirty. It is theological. He has spent 3 years confessing that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. A Christ does not kneel. A Messiah does not serve. The entire framework of Peter's faith says that power flows downward and service flows upward. And Jesus is inverting it. Jesus responds, If I do not wash you, you have no share with me. The language is startling. No share is inheritance language, covenant language, the language of belonging. Jesus is not describing a social gesture. He is describing the gospel in miniature. Unless someone does for you what you cannot do for yourself, you have no part in the kingdom. Peter, hearing this, overreacts. Then not just my feet, but my hands and my head. And Jesus, gently, the one who has bathed needs only to wash his feet. Stay with this image for a moment. The Son of God, on the last night of his life, kneeling on a stone floor with a basin, taking the position that Jewish law said was beneath even a Jewish slave. The one who spoke the universe into existence, washing the dust off the feet of fishermen. And the man who objected to it most loudly was the one who understood it least. Have you ever had someone do for you what you could not do for yourself? Not because you asked, but because they saw the dust on your feet and knelt before you could stop them. That is Passover. That is what the Hebrew word Pesach actually means. Because Pesach, the Hebrew root of the word Passover, does not only mean to pass over. The most common reading is that the angel of death passed over the blood-marked houses in Egypt. And that is true as far as it goes. But the German lexicographer Ludwig Kohler and a number of other scholars have identified a second meaning of the root psh. To protect, to hover over, like a bird sheltering its young under its wings. Isaiah chapter 31, verse 5, uses the same root. Like birds hovering, so the Lord of hosts will protect Jerusalem. He will protect and deliver it. He will spare and rescue it. The Hebrew word translated spare is uphasoa, from the same root as Pesach. The Passover is not a story about God looking away. It is a story about God standing over, wings spread, shielding the ones he loves from the destroyer. And in this upper room, on the night of Passover, the one who will die to protect them is kneeling at their feet with a towel. After the washing, after Judas walks into the night, after the door closes and the room grows quieter, Jesus begins the longest sustained teaching recorded in any of the four Gospels. John chapters 14 through 16. The Farewell Discourse. 3 full chapters of words spoken by a man who has hours to live, spoken not to crowds, but to 11 frightened men in a room. Let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. Now, the traditional reading of my Father's house is heaven, and that reading has comforted millions. But the phrase, my Father's house, appears one other time in John's Gospel. John chapter 2, verse 16. When Jesus drives the merchants from the temple, do not make my Father's house a market. In John, my Father's house is the temple, and in the temple there were rooms, priestly chambers surrounding the sanctuary where the ministers of God lived and served. The Greek word John uses is monai, which means dwelling places or abiding places. Jesus is not describing a distant heaven with rooms. He is describing a living arrangement. Where I am, you will be. Where the priest serves, you will serve. I am going to prepare a place for you in the presence of God, and I will come back and take you there myself. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. This is the last I am statement Jesus makes before the cross. He has said, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. And on the last night, in the smallest room, he says, I am the vine, not a king, not a conqueror, a vine, the thing that everything else grows from, the thing that gives life by being cut. And then, in John chapter 17, Jesus prays, the high priestly prayer. He prays for himself. He prays for the 11. And then he says something that reaches across 20 centuries. I do not ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word. He prayed for you. On the night before he was tortured and killed, in a room lit by oil lamps, with the smell of bread and wine still in the air, he prayed for people who had not yet been born. He prayed for everyone who would hear this story and believe it. And tonight, you are hearing it. If you are drifting, that is fine. Let the vine image stay with you. A plant that gives life by being pruned. A man who saves by being cut. You do not need to hold every detail. The vine holds you. The prayer ends. The room falls quiet. And then they do what every Jewish family does at the end of the Passover meal. They stand. They sing. The Hallel. Psalms 113 through 118. The second half, Psalms 115 through 118, is sung after the meal, after the cup of redemption, after the afikoman. Their voices fill the upper room, echoing off the stone walls, pushing into the street below. And again, as I told you in the first chapter, the final psalm is a 118, the psalm the crowd shouted on Sunday, the same psalm Jesus sings now on Thursday night, walking toward the door that leads to the Mount of Olives, to the garden, to the arrest. Psalm 118, verse 17. I shall not die, but I shall live. Psalm 118, verse 22. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And then this, verse 27. Bind the festal sacrifice with cords to the horns of the altar. He sang that. On the night before he was bound and led to the cross, he sang the words, bind the sacrifice to the altar. He did not stumble over them. He did not skip the verse. He sang it, knowing that in a few hours, soldiers would bind his hands and lead him to the hill where the sacrifice would be completed. Psalm 116, also part of the Hallel, contains verse 15. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his faithful servants. He sang that too, walking toward his own death, singing about how precious that death would be in the eyes of his Father. This is not a man being dragged to execution. This is a man walking to it, singing. The door of the upper room opens. The night air of Jerusalem is cool. The singing has ended, but the psalm is still in the air, still in their lungs, still resonating off the stone steps as they descend into the street. They cross the Kidron Valley. During Passover, the blood of the sacrificial lambs drained from the temple through a channel into this valley. They are walking through a brook that runs red with the blood of 250,000 lambs. The man walking at the front of the group will add his own blood to it before sunrise. The sky is full of stars. Somewhere in the city, torches are being lit and swords are being drawn. But for now, this moment, they are walking together. A man who has washed their feet, shared his bread, poured his cup, prayed for their future, and sung about being bound. If sleep is coming, let it come. Let the image of a man singing in the dark carry you. They are walking toward a garden now. The name of the garden is Gethsemane. It means oil press. And in that garden, the anointed one, the Mashiach, the one anointed with oil, will be pressed until his sweat falls like drops of blood. The psalm is finished. The sacrifice is about to be bound. To reach the Garden of Gethsemane, you have to cross the Kidron Valley. On Passover night, the brook running through that valley was not running with water. The Mishnah records that sacrificial blood drained through channels beneath the temple altar into the brook Kidron. Josephus claims that 256,000 lambs were slaughtered in a single Passover. Even if that number is inflated, tens of thousands of animals died between 3 and 5 in the afternoon, and their blood flowed downhill through stone channels into this valley. The brook is running red. 1,000 years earlier, King David crossed this same brook, fleeing his own son Absalom. 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 30. David went up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. David crossed the Kidron in tears, betrayed by someone he loved, climbing the same hill toward the same garden. The pattern repeats. But this time, the son who crosses is not fleeing betrayal. He is walking toward it. Jesus and the 11 walk through the crimson brook, sandals in the dark, the metallic smell of blood, the sound of water that is not water, the Lamb of God, crossing a stream of lamb's blood on his way to become the sacrifice that will make every other sacrifice unnecessary. They reach the garden. The name of this place is Gethsemane. In Aramaic, Gat Shmanim. It means oil press. An ancient olive press works like this. Olives are placed in a stone basin. A massive stone wheel is rolled over them, crushing them slowly. The first pressing yields pure oil, golden and clear. The second pressing, under greater weight, produces a darker oil. The final pressing, with the full force of the stone, produces a thick liquid that some say resembles blood. The name of the place is the event. The Anointed One, the Mashiach, the one whose very title means anointed with oil, has come to the place of crushing. And Isaiah chapter 53, verse 10, the passage we opened 2 chapters ago, uses the Hebrew word dacha. It was the will of the Lord to crush him. The Mashiach is crushed in the oil press. He takes Peter, James, and John further into the garden and says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch." He walks a stone's throw further. He falls to his knees. And then, according to Mark, he falls on his face. The Creator of the universe, on his face in the dirt, in the dark, in a garden named for its press. Abba, Father, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. Mark preserves the Aramaic word, Abba, not daddy, as a popular sermon illustration claims. The Oxford scholar James Barr corrected that in 1988. Abba is the Aramaic determinate form of father, respectful, intimate, not childish. The theological weight is in the fact that it is preserved at all. Mark wrote in Greek for a Greek-speaking audience. He did not translate this word. He left it in Aramaic, the language Jesus actually spoke, because some words are too sacred to translate. In his darkest hour, the prayer begins in his mother tongue. And the cup he is asking to be taken from him, is not the physical pain of crucifixion. The cup of God's wrath is an image that runs through the entire Old Testament. Isaiah chapter 51. You who have drunk from the hand of the Lord the cup of his wrath, who have drained to its dregs the goblet that makes people stagger. Jeremiah chapter 25. Take from my hand this cup filled with the wine of my wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. The cup is the full, undiluted judgment of a holy God against the accumulated sin of the human race. Not a beating, not nails. The infinite weight of divine justice concentrated into a single vessel, handed to a single man. And he is asking, with his face in the dirt, whether there is any other way. He goes back. He prays the same prayer. He returns to the disciples, finds them sleeping, goes back 3 times. Mark records that the words were the same. He is not building an argument. He is repeating a plea. Abba, take this cup, but not what I will. The not what I will is the hinge of the universe. Every sin in human history begins with my will, not yours. Adam, Eve, Babel, every act of rebellion. And here, in the dirt, the Son reverses it. Not my will, yours. There is not another way. Luke, the physician, is the only gospel writer who records what happens next. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. The Greek is precise. Hosei thromboi hematos. As it were, great clots of blood. Not a metaphor, a medical observation. Luke was a doctor. He described what he saw or was told with clinical vocabulary. The condition is called hematidrosis. It occurs when extreme psychological stress causes subcutaneous capillaries surrounding the sweat glands to rupture, mixing blood with perspiration. It has been documented in the European Journal of Case Reports in Internal Medicine. It is rare. It is real. In the place called oil press, the anointed one is being pressed until the blood flows like oil from crushed olives. He returns to Peter, James, and John. They are asleep. Could you not watch with me 1 hour? He goes back to pray. He returns. They are asleep again. A 3rd time. Asleep. 3 times he asked them to stay awake. 3 times they failed. Mark structures this with the precision of a novelist, because in a few hours, Peter will stand beside another fire. And 3 times, someone will ask him if he knows this man. And 3 times, Peter will say no. 3 times asleep. 3 times denied. The structural parallel is not accidental. The failure to pray leads inevitably to the failure under pressure. Mark chapter 14, verse 38, makes the connection explicit. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. They did not watch. They did not pray, and when the test came, they broke. The garden is quiet. The prayer is over. The blood has dried on his forehead, and the first stage of the abandonment has already begun. Stage 1. Every friend asleep. The three who witnessed his glory on the mountain of transfiguration cannot stay awake through his agony in the garden. There will be 3 more stages, each one lonelier than the last. Torches appear through the olive trees. The sound of feet moving quickly. The rattle of metal. An armed detachment sent by the chief priests and the Pharisees, carrying lanterns and torches and weapons. On a night lit by a full Passover moon, they bring artificial light to find the light of the world. John records this detail, and it is not accidental. At the front of the group is Judas. Judas had told the arresting party, "The one I will kiss is the man." The Greek verb he used when he gave the instruction was phileo, a simple kiss, a greeting. But when he reaches Jesus, the verb changes. Mark uses kataphileo, an intensified compound. Kittle's Theological Dictionary of the New Testament says the compound always denotes the intense and ardent kiss. The Darby translation renders it, "covered him with kisses," not a quick peck on the cheek, a fervent, repeated, extravagant display of affection. And Jesus says, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" The intimacy of the betrayal is the horror of it. The soldiers step forward. John records what happens next. They ask, "Who are you looking for?" Jesus answers, "I am." The Greek is ego eimi, 2 words. The same 2 words God spoke to Moses at the burning bush. I am who I am. Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. The sacred name. The name the high priest spoke once a year in the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement. And when Jesus says it, the armed men draw back and fall to the ground. A detachment of soldiers carrying swords and clubs are knocked flat by 2 words from an unarmed man who has just been sweating blood. The power that holds the universe together flickered through him, and armed men could not stand in its presence. Then he lets them stand up. He asks again, "Who are you looking for?" And he adds, "If you are looking for me, let these men go." He is not being arrested. He is surrendering. And even in surrender, he is protecting the others. Peter draws a sword. He swings at the head of the high priest's servant, a man named Malchus, and cuts off his right ear. Only Luke, the physician, records what happens next. Jesus touches the ear and heals it. A miracle of compassion in the middle of his own arrest. The last miracle before the cross, performed on the servant of the man who is orchestrating his death. Jesus turns to Peter. "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" The cup, again, the cup he asked to be taken away. He will drink it. They carry swords, 2 of them. Luke records this detail earlier in the evening. 2 swords among 13 men walking to Passover. In a city under military occupation during the most politically dangerous week of the year, they are armed, not for rebellion, for survival. And now Jesus tells them to put the swords away. Then all the disciples left him and fled. The Greek is emphatic. Pantes, aphantis, auton, ephagon, all, having abandoned, him, fled, not some, not most, all. The men who had said, "We will never leave you," are running through olive trees in the dark. The men who ate his bread and drank his cup less than 3 hours ago cannot stay in the garden. The man who drew a sword and swung at a servant's head is now sprinting in the opposite direction. And then Mark adds one of the strangest details in the entire New Testament. A young man, wearing nothing but a linen cloth, was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. The Greek word for young man is neaniskos. It appears only one other time in Mark's Gospel, at the empty tomb, where a young man sits dressed in a white robe. The same rare word. The one who lost his clothing in the garden is reclothed at the resurrection. The ancient tradition identifies this young man as Mark himself, a teenager living in a house nearby, who ran to the garden in his nightclothes when he heard the commotion. The gospel writer's signature, hidden in the text. I was there. I saw it. I ran. The final disciple, stripped of even his clothing in the act of abandonment. Stage 2. Every friend fled. The garden is empty now, except for soldiers, torches, and the prisoner. The oil press has done its work. The Anointed One has been crushed. His friends are gone. His sweat is mixed with blood. The linen cloth lies in the dirt where the last follower dropped it. If you are drifting, let this image rest with you. A garden at night, torchlight on olive trees, and a man standing alone, surrendered, knowing exactly what is coming, and choosing not to stop it. Now one more thing. One Greek word that will follow us for the rest of this story. Paradidomi. It means to hand over. And in the New Testament, it is used for 4 different people doing 4 different things with the same verb. Judas, paradidomi. Judas, who betrayed him. English says betrayed. Greek says handed over. The chief priests, paradidomi. They handed him over to Pilate. English says delivered. Greek says handed over. Pilate paradidomi. He handed him over to be crucified. English says delivered. Same word. And then Paul in Romans chapter 8, verse 32. He who did not spare his own son, but handed him over for us all. Same verb. Same action. One word carries the treachery of Judas, the cowardice of Pilate, the complicity of the priests, and the love of God. What humans intended as betrayal, God intended as gift. The same handing over. The same verb. Opposite meanings. This word will come back. Every time you hear handed over in the chapters that follow, you will know the betrayal and the love share the same grammar. They bind his hands. They lead him back across the Kidron, through the blood of the lambs, up the hill to the house of the high priest. Peter follows, at a distance, close enough to be identified, far enough to deny it, and somewhere in the courtyard, a fire is being lit, a charcoal fire, the kind that fills the night air with a distinct, unforgettable smell. Peter will warm himself at that fire, and by its light, 3 times, he will say, "I do not know the man." There is a provision in Jewish law, Mishnah Sanhedrin chapter 4 verse 5, that says if the verdict in a capital case is unanimous, the defendant must be acquitted. Let that settle for a moment. A unanimous guilty vote does not confirm guilt. It means the court has failed to adequately defend the accused. If not a single member of the Sanhedrin can find anything to say in the defendant's favor, it suggests collusion, not certainty. Mark chapter 14, verse 64, records the result of Jesus' trial before the Sanhedrin. They all condemned him as deserving death. All. Under their own legal system, the verdict was an acquittal. And this was not the only violation. The trial of Jesus before the Jewish council broke at least 14 of the Sanhedrin's own procedural rules, not 1 or 2 ambiguous technicalities. 14 documented violations. Night sessions were forbidden. Sanhedrin, chapter 4, verse 1. In cases of capital law, the court judges during the daytime. Both the hearing before Annas and the trial before Caiaphas occurred at night. A guilty verdict in a capital case could not be issued on the same day. The law required the court to sleep on the decision, to reconvene the following day after a night of reflection. Jesus was arrested, tried, convicted, and sent to the Romans before sunrise. Capital trials during festivals were forbidden. Jesus was tried on the eve of Passover. The trial was required to be held in the Hall of Hewn Stone, the official chamber within the temple precinct. This trial was held in the private residence of the high priest. Capital cases must begin with arguments for acquittal. No advocate for the defense was ever called. The proceedings began with a search for testimony against him. Self-incrimination was prohibited. The high priest forced Jesus to testify against himself. "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ." The Mishnah was not written until around 200 AD, and some scholars argue these rules may not have been formalized at the time of Jesus. That is possible. But there is more. In capital cases, voting was required to begin with the most junior members, to prevent the authority of senior judges from influencing the outcome. In this trial, the high priest pronounced first. The sympathetic members, Joseph of Arimathea, and possibly Nicodemus, appear to have been excluded or marginalized. Luke notes that Joseph had not consented to their decision. And most damning of all, John chapter 11 records that Caiaphas had already declared the verdict weeks before the arrest. It is better that one man die for the people. The verdict preceded the trial. The trial was theater. Even by the most conservative reading, this was not justice. It was a sentencing hearing dressed in legal robes. Now, I want you to notice something about the way Mark tells this story, because Mark is doing something with his structure that most readers miss entirely. Mark does not tell the trial scene and then the denial scene. He interleaves them. Scholars call this technique intercalation, or more simply, a Markan sandwich. Mark takes one story, splits it in half, and inserts a second story into the middle. And the point is always the contrast. Here is the structure. Jesus is taken to the high priest. Peter follows at a distance, enters the courtyard. Cut 2. Jesus stands before the Sanhedrin. Cut back to Peter in the courtyard. The trial is the filling. The denial is the bread. And Mark wants you to read them together, because every detail in the trial has a mirror in the denial, and the mirrors are devastating. Inside, Jesus faces the most powerful religious authority in Judaism. The high priest stands in his robes. The council is seated. The chamber is lit by lamplight. Outside, Peter faces a servant girl. She is warming herself by a fire. The fire is a charcoal fire. John uses a specific Greek word for this fire, anthrakia. It means a fire made from charcoal, not wood. Charcoal burns hotter and differently than wood. It has a distinct smell, acrid and deep, nothing like the sweet smoke of olive or pine. The smell saturates your clothing, your hair, your hands. Remember this word, anthrakia. It appears only twice in the entire New Testament. Here, at Peter's worst moment, and one other time, which I will tell you at the end. Inside, the high priest asks Jesus directly, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus answers, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." This is the most compressed Christological claim in the entire New Testament. In a single sentence, Jesus merges three distinct sources of authority. I am, the divine name from Exodus 3. The Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, a direct quotation of Daniel chapter 7, verse 13, where one like a son of man approaches the Ancient of Days and receives dominion over all nations. And coming on the clouds of heaven, the language reserved exclusively for God Himself in the Old Testament. He is saying, I am God. I am the figure Daniel saw, and I will return as judge. The weight of this claim in this room cannot be overstated. The book of 1st Enoch, widely read in Second Temple Judaism, had elaborated on Daniel's vision. The Son of Man was understood as a pre-existent heavenly figure who would sit on a throne of glory and execute judgment on the nations. When Jesus combines this title with the divine name and the language of divine clouds, every scholar in the room understands the scope of the claim. He is not saying he is a prophet. He is not saying he is a teacher with special authority. He is claiming to be the pre-existent, divine judge of all humanity. And he is saying this while bound, at night, standing in the house of the man who is trying to kill him. He is saying this to the high priest, the man whose job is to speak the divine name once a year, on the Day of Atonement, in the Holy of Holies. And now the name is standing in front of him, in the flesh, speaking. Caiaphas tears his robes. It is the gesture of outrage, the sign that blasphemy has been spoken. Every member of the council would have understood it instantly. But Leviticus chapter 21, verse 10, says this about the high priest. He shall not uncover his head or tear his clothes. The one prohibition that the high priest must never violate, the tearing of his consecrated garments, is the very act Caiaphas performs in his rush to condemn. He disqualifies himself as high priest at the exact moment he condemns the true high priest. And consider the parallel. In a few hours, the temple veil will tear from top to bottom. The torn robe of Caiaphas and the torn veil of the temple are saying the same thing. The old system is finished. What Caiaphas was called to do was not to tear his high priestly robe, but to remove it and deliver it to the man standing before him. That is what is happening inside. A claim of cosmic identity, answered by a legal farce, presided over by a man who disqualified himself in the act of judging. Now cut to the courtyard, to the fire, to Peter. The first denial. A servant girl looks at Peter in the firelight. She studies his face. You also were with that Nazarene Jesus. Peter says, I neither know nor understand what you are talking about. He moves away from the fire, toward the gateway, toward the door. The instinct is to create distance, to edge toward the exit. The second denial. The same servant girl sees him again and tells the bystanders, this man is one of them. Peter denies it again. And inside, at this exact moment, false witnesses are testifying against Jesus. Their testimony does not agree. Mark records this with precision. Their statements did not agree. But the court presses forward anyway. The third denial. The bystanders say to Peter, surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean. His accent gives him away. You cannot hide Galilee in your vowels. The northern dialect rounded its consonants differently, flattened certain vowels. Peter's speech betrayed what his words denied, and Peter begins to curse and swear. I do not know this man you are talking about. Not, I do not know him. I do not know this man. He will not even say the name. Notice what Mark is doing. Inside, false witnesses incorrectly identify Jesus. Outside, a servant girl correctly identifies Peter. Inside, Jesus affirms who he is and receives a death sentence. Outside, Peter denies who he is and survives. Jesus affirms and is sentenced to death. Peter denies and lives. The rooster crows. And Luke, the physician, the writer who notices what the other gospel writers do not, adds one detail that is found in no other account. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. The Greek is precise. Strapais ho kurios eneblepsen. The Lord, having turned, looked into, not a glance, not an accusation, a look. Across the courtyard, through the smoke and the firelight, the man being led away in chains turns his head and finds Peter's eyes. No words. Just a look from a man who just said, I am, to the high priest. Now looking at the man who just said, I do not know him. Peter goes out and weeps bitterly. The Greek is a klausen pikros. Convulsive, body-shaking sobbing. The man who swore he would die with Jesus could not withstand questioning by a servant girl. Stage 3 of the progressive abandonment. Every friend asleep. Every friend fled. And now, the closest friend denying. 3 times they slept. 3 times he denied. The structural parallel that Mark built across 2 chapters has completed its first cycle. There will be a third cycle. 3 questions beside a different fire. But that comes later. For now, Peter is outside in the dark, weeping. And Jesus is inside, being struck by the guards. In 1990, construction workers building a water park in Jerusalem's Peace Forest accidentally broke through the roof of an ancient burial cave. The archaeologist Zvi Greenhut of the Israel Antiquities Authority excavated the site and found 12 burial niches containing multiple ossuaries, the limestone bone boxes used during the Second Temple period. One ossuary stood out. It was ornately decorated with intricate rosette patterns, and it bore an inscription: Yehoseph bar Caiapha, Joseph, son of Caiaphas. The actual bone box of the high priest who condemned Jesus was found under a park in Jerusalem. His bones had been stored a generation after his death in a decorated limestone box that archaeologists can hold in their hands today. You can see photographs of it. You can read the inscription. A second ossuary, authenticated in 2011, bears the inscription: Miriam, daughter of Yeshua, son of Caiaphas, priests of Maaziah from Beth Imri, linking the family to a specific priestly division mentioned in 1 Chronicles. 2 iron nails were found in the family tomb. The man who tore his robes, the man who presided over the most consequential illegal trial in human history, he was real. He lived. He died. His bones were placed in a box, and the box was found under a water park in Jerusalem. If you are drifting, let the image be this: a courtyard at night, a charcoal fire burning, a man weeping outside the door, and inside, bound, struck, blindfolded, the same man who washed Peter's feet hours ago. The one who knelt is now the one who stands accused. The one who served is now the one who is condemned. Peter is standing by a charcoal fire. Remember the word, anthrakia. It appears only twice in the entire New Testament. The first time is here, John chapter 18, verse 18. Peter's worst night, the fire that witnessed his failure, the smoke that saturated his clothes. The second time is John chapter 21, verse 9. After the resurrection, Jesus appears on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and he has prepared something for the disciples, a charcoal fire. He has cooked breakfast over the exact same kind of fire. And beside that fire, he will ask Peter 3 questions. Do you love me? 3 questions for 3 denials. The scene of shame will become the scene of grace. But that is the last chapter. For now, the first fire is still burning. The smell of charcoal is in Peter's hair, and Jesus is being led from the house of the high priest to the council chamber for the morning session that will formalize the verdict that was already determined. The sun rises. They hand him over to Pontius Pilate. Paradidomi. The same verb. The chain that began with Judas now passes to the chief priests. Handed over. Delivered. The betrayal and the love continue to share the same grammar. In the next chapter, a Roman governor will ask a question that echoes through every century since. What shall I do then with Jesus who is called Christ? Pilate presented 2 prisoners to the crowd, both named Jesus. One was a murderer and insurrectionist whose surname, Barabbas, meant Son of the Father. The other was the Son of the Father. Which Jesus do you want? Some early manuscripts of Matthew's Gospel, noted by the 3rd century scholar Origen, give Barabbas's full name as Jesus Barabbas. The critical edition of the Greek New Testament includes Jesus in brackets at Matthew chapter 27, verses 16 and 17. If this reading is original, the question to the crowd was not Barabbas or Jesus. It was, Which Jesus? The false son of the Father, or the true one? The crowd chose the counterfeit. But before we reach that moment, I want you to see the structure of this trial, because John is doing something extraordinary with it. John's account of the Roman trial follows a 7-scene chiastic structure, a literary architecture so precise that the scholar Raymond Brown called it one of the master dramatic constructions in this gospel. The structure alternates between inside and outside. Inside is where Pilate speaks with Jesus privately about truth, about kingship, about origin. Outside is where Pilate faces the crowd, confronting politics, manipulation, and threats. Pilate shuttles back and forth between truth and expedience, between the kingdom not of this world and the empire that pays his salary. And at the center of the chiasm, the structural heart, the axis around which every conversation about truth and power rotates, there is no dialogue at all. There is violence, the scourging, the crowning with thorns. The most brutal moment in the narrative is the center of the literary architecture. John is not just telling a story. He is constructing a cathedral, and at its center, the king is being crowned in blood. The trial begins outside. The Jewish leaders bring Jesus to the praetorium, but will not enter. It is Passover. To enter a Gentile building would render them ceremonially unclean, unable to eat the Passover meal. They are careful about ritual purity while delivering an innocent man to death. Pilate comes out to them. What charges do you bring against this man? They do not offer specific charges. They say, if he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you. Paradidomi. Again, handed over. The chain continues. Judas handed him to the priests. The priests hand him to Pilate. The same verb. The betrayal and the love continue sharing the same grammar. Matthew alone preserves an extraordinary interruption. While Pilate is sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sends him a message. Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream. In Greco-Roman culture, dreams from wives carried prophetic weight. The pagan Roman woman calls Jesus righteous, while the Jewish council has just declared him guilty. And Pilate, the judge, ignores the warning. Pilate goes inside. He interrogates Jesus. Are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus answers with a question that exposes the gap between power and truth. Is that your own idea, or did others talk to you about me? Pilate responds with the most revealing line in the trial. Am I a Jew? Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done? And Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. Pilate goes back outside. He declares Jesus innocent for the first time. I find no basis for a charge against him. Then he invokes the custom of releasing a prisoner at Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews? And the crowd shouts for Barabbas. Now here is what most listeners do not see. On the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the high priest would present 2 goats before the people. The first goat was slaughtered as a sin offering. The second goat, the scapegoat, was released into the wilderness, symbolically carrying the sins of the people away. 2 goats, 1 killed, 1 released. 2 prisoners, 1 killed, 1 released. The crowd is unwittingly enacting the Yom Kippur ritual. They are choosing which goat to release and which to slaughter. Barabbas, the guilty one, the son of the Father, goes free, his sins carried away. Jesus, the innocent one, the true Son of the Father, is led to the slaughter. The crowd does not know they are performing liturgy. They think they are making a political choice. They are making a cosmic one. And then they say something that has been used for centuries to justify unspeakable evil. Matthew chapter 27, verse 25. His blood be on us and on our children. This verse has been weaponized against the Jewish people across 2 millennia of pogroms, expulsions, and exterminations. It must be said clearly that weaponization is a grotesque misreading, because there is a deeper irony here than cruelty has ever understood. His blood be on us is exactly what every believer asks for. The blood of Jesus is not a curse. It is the means of salvation. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 24 says, "The sprinkled blood of Jesus speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Abel's blood cried to God for vengeance. Jesus' blood cries for mercy." The crowd's unwitting curse may actually be an unwitting prayer. Let his blood be upon us. That is the gospel. And Peter, standing in this same city, will preach to the same crowd at Pentecost. Repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ, for the forgiveness of your sins. Many of them will. The blood is upon them, and it saves. 2 Jesuses, 2 goats, one released, one slaughtered, a crowd performing the Day of Atonement without knowing it, a sentence they meant as condemnation that turned out to be salvation. Let the irony settle. The things men meant for evil, God meant for good. The grammar of betrayal is the grammar of love. We are at the center of the chiasm now. The scourging. Roman scourging used a weapon called the flagellum. It was a short-handled whip with multiple leather thongs, each knotted with pieces of bone, sharp sheep bones, or small lead balls. The 4th century church historian Eusebius describes the aftermath. The veins were laid bare, and the very muscles, sinews, and bowels were open to exposure. Isaiah chapter 52, verse 14, had described it 700 years earlier. His appearance was so marred, beyond human semblance. The condemned was stripped, tied to a low column, and struck repeatedly. There was no fixed number of strokes in Roman practice. Jewish law limited flogging to 39 lashes. The Romans had no such limit. The scourging continued until the officer in charge determined the prisoner had been sufficiently weakened for crucifixion. But not so broken he would die before he reached the cross. They press a crown of thorns into his scalp, not a circlet as Western art has imagined. Archaeological and shroud evidence suggests a cap of thorns pressed over the entire head. They drape a purple robe over the wounds. They strike him in the face. They mock, "Hail, King of the Jews." Pilate brings Jesus out, bleeding, purple-robed, thorn-crowned, and he says 2 words that have echoed through 20 centuries of art, theology, and human conscience. Exe homo. Behold the man. The Greek is ideo anthropos. Anthropos means not merely man, as in male, but human being. Pilate may intend contempt. Look at this pathetic creature. Or perhaps he hopes the sight of the beaten prisoner will satisfy the crowd's bloodlust. But John's gospel operates on depths Pilate cannot see. Scholars hear at least 4 layers of resonance in these 2 words. The Son of Man, from Daniel 7, the human figure who receives universal dominion. The new Adam, the human being. The suffering servant of Isaiah 52, so marred he no longer looks human. And possibly Zechariah chapter 6, verse 12, where the Septuagint reads, "Behold, a man." Anatole is his name, a messianic coronation text. Pilate speaks more truth than he knows. Behold, in fact, the man. The crowd is not satisfied. Crucify! Crucify! Pilate goes inside one last time. Where do you come from? Jesus is silent. Do you not know I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you? Jesus answers, You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given you from above. Pilate tries once more to release him, but the crowd delivers the final threat. If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. The threat works. Political survival triumphs over justice. Pilate sits on the judgment seat, and he says, with devastating Johannine irony, Here is your king. Take him away. Crucify him. Shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answer, We have no king but Caesar. The weight of that sentence. The priests of Israel, the custodians of the Shema, the men who recite daily, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, who teach that God alone is sovereign, who would never bend the knee to any earthly king in their theology, now publicly declare their allegiance to a pagan emperor. To save their political position, they abandon every theological claim their office was created to protect. We have no king but Caesar. The irony is almost unbearable. The men who guard the Torah are declaring that a man in Rome is their king, while the king they have been waiting for stands before them in a purple robe. Pilate hands Jesus over. Paradidomi. The chain advances its final link before the cross. Judas to the priests to Pilate, Pilate to the soldiers. 1 verb, 4 agents. Each thinks they are disposing of a problem. None of them understand they are fulfilling a plan. If you are drifting, let this image stay. A man standing in a purple robe, crowned with thorns, bleeding, silent, and a Roman governor saying, without understanding what he is saying, Behold the man. They lead him out of the praetorium. He carries the crossbeam, the patibulum, a heavy wooden beam weighing roughly 100 pounds, not the full cross. The vertical stake was a permanent fixture at the execution site. Only the crossbeam was carried. He has been scourged. He has been beaten. He has not slept. He has been sweating blood. His body is failing. The streets of Jerusalem are narrow, some barely wide enough for 2 men to walk abreast. Stone underfoot, slick with the residue of a city at Passover. The crowd presses against walls. Soldiers shout in Latin. Women weep. The beam scrapes against the stone walls of the narrow passageways, and somewhere along the route, his body gives out. He stumbles. He falls. The crossbeam hits the stone. The soldiers seize a man from the crowd. They compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. That is Mark chapter 15, verse 21. And the detail that matters is the sons' names, Alexander and Rufus. Mark does not name people unless his audience would recognize them. Mark's gospel is traditionally associated with the church in Rome. And in Romans chapter 16, verse 13, Paul greets Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother, who has been a mother to me also. The connection is widely considered probable. A man from North Africa, coming into the city for Passover, dragged from the crowd by Roman soldiers, forced to carry a condemned criminal's crossbeam. And that act of forced labor changed everything. Simon became a believer. His wife became a spiritual mother to Paul. His sons, Alexander and Rufus, became known figures in the early church. Simon did not choose the cross. The cross chose him. Along the road, Luke records one more detail found in no other gospel. A group of women follow, weeping. And Jesus, carrying no beam now, his body torn, his face unrecognizable, turns to them. Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. This is his last public teaching. On the road to execution, the dying man comforts his mourners. He prophesies the destruction of Jerusalem that will come in 40 years, when the Romans will level the city and the people will cry out for the mountains to cover them. Even now, with his flesh hanging in strips and his blood marking the stones behind him, his last public words are not about himself. They are about the people who will suffer after he is gone. If sleep is near, let it come. The streets are quieter now. The crowd has thinned. A man from North Africa walks beside the soldiers, carrying a beam that does not belong to him. There is a hill ahead. It is called Golgotha. It means place of the skull. And in 600 steps, the story reaches its center. The next chapter is the Crucifixion. The paradidomi chain will find its resolution there. The missing fourth cup from the Last Supper will reappear. The Isaiah 53 thread will begin to close. And a word will be spoken from the cross that will redefine everything the listener thinks they know about what it means for something to be finished. Of the tens of thousands the Romans crucified, exactly one body has ever been found with a nail still in the bone. A 13-centimeter iron nail, driven through the right heel of a man named Yehohanan, bent against a knot in olive wood. The excavation was in 1968, in a neighborhood called Givat HaMivtar, north of Jerusalem. An ossuary, a limestone bone box, bore the inscription, Yehohanan son of Haghol. Inside, the right heel bone still had the nail driven through it. The olive wood had been too hard. The nail bent on a knot as it was hammered, and the executioner could not pull it out. So the heel, the nail, and a fragment of olive wood were buried together. Tens of thousands of crucifixions across the Roman Empire, spanning centuries. One nail, one bone, one body that archaeology can touch. And with that single artifact, we know what the texts describe. We know what happened to the body they are now carrying up the hill called Golgotha. The soldiers lay him down on the crossbeam. The stipes, the vertical post, is already planted in the ground. It has been used before. The nails do not go through the palms. The Greek word John uses is care, which covers the hand and the wrist. But anatomy tells us what the text implies. A nail through the palm tears through the soft tissue under body weight. The wrist, between the radius and the ulna, holds. The nail passes through the median nerve. Physicians who have studied crucifixion describe the sensation as a bolt of fire shooting through the arm and locking every muscle in sustained contraction. There is a clinical word for this kind of pain: excruciating. From the Latin, ex cruce, from the cross. The Romans did not have a word for this kind of agony, so they invented one, named it after the instrument. The crossbeam is hoisted, his body weight settles, and the mechanics of death begin. A crucified man can inhale by pulling himself up on the nails, using his arms to expand his chest. He cannot exhale without pushing up on the nail through his feet. Every breath becomes a deliberate act. Every exhale costs a decision. Death comes not from blood loss, but from the slow failure of the will to breathe. And his first words from the cross are not a cry of pain, not a curse, not silence. Father, forgive them. They do not know what they are doing. Luke records this in the present tense. Not forgive them for what they have done. Forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Present tense. Continuous action. The Greek is aphes autois. He is asking the Father to send their sins away, like the scapegoat released into the wilderness on the Day of Atonement. The same verb, aphemi, that described the scapegoat carrying Israel's transgressions into the desert. He is forgiving them while the nails are being driven, not after, not from a distance. While the hammer falls, while the median nerve fires, while his wrists lock in spasm, the breath he uses to scream is the breath he uses to intercede. Isaiah wrote it 7 centuries earlier. He bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. The prophecy is being fulfilled in real time, using the same breath that is slowly being crushed out of his body. Above his head, Pilate has written a sign. The Romans called it the titulus, the charge nailed to the cross for public display. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. John is the only gospel writer who records that it was written in 3 languages: Hebrew, Latin, Greek. Each audience reads a different claim. In Hebrew, the language of Israel, the words declare him the Messiah of the covenant people. In Latin, the language of Rome, the words mock a failed political pretender in the empire's official tongue. In Greek, the language of philosophy and commerce, the words announce a universal king to every literate traveler passing the Jerusalem road. The chief priests protest. They go to Pilate and say, "Do not write the King of the Jews. Write, 'This man said, I am the King of the Jews.'" Pilate refuses. "What I have written, I have written." A pagan governor, intending sarcasm, accidentally writes the truest sentence of his career. In every language of the known world. Beneath the cross, the soldiers divide his clothing. 4 soldiers, 4 garments, 1 for each. But there is a 5th item, the tunic, and John describes it with unusual precision. Seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. Josephus, the 1st century Jewish historian, describes the high priest's robe in almost identical language. This tunic is not composed of two pieces to be stitched at the shoulders and sides. It is one long woven cloth, seamless, woven in one piece, from top to bottom. The soldiers look at this garment and say, "Let us not tear it." Instead, they cast lots. In the previous chapter, Caiaphas tore his own high priestly robes, disqualifying himself from the priesthood at the exact moment he condemned Jesus. Now the true high priest hangs on the cross in a garment that matches the priestly description, and even Roman soldiers refuse to tear it. Psalm 22, verse 18, written 1,000 years before this afternoon. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots, fulfilled to the detail by men who have never read it. Because this is what is happening, though no one present can see it. On the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the high priest entered the Holy of Holies alone. He wore the seamless robe. He carried the blood of the sacrifice. He passed through the veil that separated God from his people. He made intercession. He bore the sin. He emerged, and the people knew whether God had accepted the offering by whether the priest survived. In the previous chapter, the sitting high priest disqualified himself by tearing his robes. Now the true high priest performs the ceremony, not in the temple, on a Roman cross, not behind a veil, in public, not with the blood of a goat, with his own. He wears the seamless garment. He carries his own blood. He intercedes. "Father, forgive them." He bears the sin of the people. And the veil of the temple, the barrier between God and humanity, 60 feet tall, 4 inches thick, is about to tear itself from top to bottom. The crucifixion is not the interruption of the priesthood. It is the priesthood fulfilled. A torn robe and a seamless one. A disqualified priest and a consecrated one. The image holds. If you have ever watched someone do the right thing and be destroyed for it, if you have ever seen integrity punished and corruption rewarded, this is the scene that meets you. The one wearing the robes of office is the fraud. The one stripped and hanging is the priest. The cross does not look like a temple, but it is. Near the cross stands his mother. John is the only gospel writer to record this. Mary is there, the woman who was told by the prophet Simeon, when Jesus was 40 days old, that a sword will pierce through your own soul also. That was 33 years ago. The sword has arrived. Jesus looks at his mother. He looks at the disciple he loves, the one tradition identifies as John. And from the cross, struggling to inhale, using precious breath, he says, "Woman, behold your son." Then to the disciple, "Behold your mother," a dying man's last responsibility. In Jewish culture, the eldest son provided for his mother. Jesus has no property, no money, no inheritance to leave. He has one thing left, the disciple who did not run. And he gives his mother to that disciple, and that disciple to his mother. From that hour, John took her into his home, a new family formed at the cross, not by blood, not by law, but by the final act of a son who will not abandon his mother, even while he is being abandoned by God. Someone lifts a sponge soaked in sour wine toward his mouth. on a branch of hyssop. Hyssop, the same plant Moses commanded the Israelites to use on the first Passover night. Exodus chapter 12, verse 22. Take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and touch the lintel and the 2 doorposts with the blood. The plant that applied the lamb's blood to the doorframe is now lifted to the lips of the lamb. It appears in Numbers, in the purification rite of the red heifer, cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet yarn, burned together to cleanse the defilement of death. All 3 elements are present at this cross: the wood, the hyssop, the scarlet of blood. And David, purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Psalm 51, verse 7. The instrument of purification, appearing at the moment purification is made permanent. Now, the word, paradidomi. We opened this loop 3 chapters ago. The Greek verb meaning to hand over. Judas handed him over. The chief priests handed him over. Pilate handed him over. Each one thinking they were exercising power. Each one thinking the verb belonged to them. But Paul writes in Romans chapter 8, verse 32, He who did not spare his own son, but handed him over for us all. Same verb. Every handing over. Every act of betrayal, cowardice, and political calculation was simultaneously an act of divine purpose. What Judas intended as treachery, what Caiaphas intended as elimination, what Pilate intended as appeasement, God intended as gift. The one handed over by everyone is the one God handed over for everyone. The paradidomi chain resolves here, at the cross. Not an explanation, but an event. The betrayal and the love share the same grammar, and they meet in the same body, on the same wood, at the same hour. The hours pass. His breathing grows shallow. The effort of pushing up on the nail to exhale becomes more than his body can sustain. The chest muscles lock in a state of inhalation. The lungs fill but cannot empty. Carbon dioxide builds. The heart, starved of oxygen, begins to fail. A centurion stands at the base of the cross. A Roman officer. A pagan. A man whose professional title, Son of God, belongs to Caesar. In the Roman imperial cult, Divi Filius, Son of the Divine One, is the emperor's exclusive claim. It is stamped on coins, inscribed on monuments, spoken in oaths of loyalty to Rome. This centurion has watched men die before. He has supervised executions. He knows how they end. But something about this death is different. Mark records his words. Truly, this man was the Son of God. The title the centurion transfers from the emperor to a crucified Jew is an act of treason. Whether he understood the full weight of what he said, we do not know. But Mark, writing for a Roman audience, places the climactic confession of his gospel not in the mouth of a disciple, not in the words of a prophet, but in the involuntary recognition of a pagan soldier watching a man die. The nail and the bone, the seamless robe and the torn one, the hyssop branch reaching from the first Passover to the last, the paradidomi chain linking every betrayal to a single gift, the centurion's confession spoken by someone who had no reason to believe and no theology to explain what he was seeing. Everything converges here. The archaeology, the language, the typology, the prophecy. Not in a lecture hall, not in a seminar, on a hill outside a city wall, in the middle of a Friday afternoon, while most of the world has no idea that anything is happening at all. If you are still here, let this settle. A man is dying on a cross. He is forgiving the men who put him there. He is providing for his mother. He is wearing the garment of a priest. He is fulfilling words written 1,000 years before he was born. And the word for what Judas did to him is the same word for what God did for you. Let that rest. The darkness began at noon. 3 hours of it. Supernatural, unexplainable, recorded by a pagan historian named Phlegon from 800 miles away during a full moon that made a natural eclipse impossible. 3 hours. And what happened during those 3 hours required a word that would correct 2,000 years of preaching. The word he spoke last has been preached in more sermons than almost any other. It is finished. Tetelestai. And for decades, preachers have said it meant paid in full, stamped on a receipt in the ancient marketplace. There is one problem. That is not what the word means. The claim rests on a verb confusion. The abbreviation tetel, found on certain Greek papyri, expands to teteloneitai, from the verb teloneo, which means to collect taxes. It has nothing to do with tetelestai. That word comes from a different verb entirely, teleo, which means to complete, to bring to an end, to accomplish. The correction has been available in papyri databases since 1934. Dr. Gary Manning of Biola University published the full case in 2022. The actual meaning is not smaller. It is larger. Tetelestai is not a transaction receipt. It is a cosmic declaration. It has been permanently completed, not a debt settled at a counter. A mission accomplished across eternity. The perfect tense in Greek means the action is finished and the results stand forever. What he completed on that cross has no expiration, no revision, no addendum. Let that land for a moment. The most famous last word from the most famous death in human history has been slightly misquoted for generations. And the real meaning is not less powerful. It is more. Not paid in full, like a bill at a register. Permanently completed, like a work of art that can never be undone. But that word is only one of 7. The tradition of the 7 last words gathers every phrase Jesus spoke from the cross, drawn from all 4 Gospels. No single account contains all 7, and together they form something no one planned. A structure, an arc, a liturgy spoken by a dying man who was composing theology with his final breaths. His first words were a prayer. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. He opens not with pain, but with intercession, not for those who asked, but for those who did not even know they needed it. His last words were also a prayer. Father, into your hands, I commit my spirit. A quotation from Psalm 31, verse 5. And here is the detail that changes everything about how those words sound. Psalm 31, verse 5, was a Jewish bedtime prayer. It was what mothers taught their children to whisper before falling asleep. Into your hands I commit my spirit. A child's prayer spoken in the dark, trusting that someone was watching over them through the night. Jesus died with a child's bedtime prayer on his lips. If you are beginning to drift tonight, those are good words to carry with you. Into your hands I commit my spirit. He said them while dying. You can say them while falling asleep. The words are the same. The trust is the same. Between those first and last words, something happened to the sky. All three synoptic gospels record it. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness covered the land. Not an overcast sky, not a storm, darkness. For 3 hours, in the middle of the day, the sun stopped giving its light. And this could not have been a solar eclipse, because Passover falls during a full moon. And a solar eclipse during a full moon is astronomically impossible. A pagan Greek historian named Phlegon of Tralles, writing from approximately 800 miles away, recorded an extraordinary darkness during the reign of Tiberius Caesar. Tertullian, the 2nd century theologian, was so confident in the historical record that he dared the Roman Senate to check their own archives. The darkness carries layers. It echoes the 9th plague of Egypt. 3 days of palpable darkness before the first Passover. It reverses the first act of creation. Let there be light, God said in Genesis 1. And now, at the death of the one through whom all things were made, the light is withdrawn. Creation mourning its creator. And somewhere in that darkness, between the 6th and 9th hours, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Those words have troubled Christians for 2,000 years. They sound like despair. They sound like a man who has been abandoned by the God he trusted. But there is something you need to know about first-century Jewish practice. When a rabbi quoted the first line of a psalm, he was invoking the entire psalm, not just the opening. Every verse that followed. And Psalm 22, the psalm Jesus is quoting, does not end in despair. It begins there. My God, why have you forsaken me?" But it does not stay there. The psalm turns. The lament becomes a declaration of trust. The suffering becomes a vision of God's universal reign. And the final line of Psalm 22 in Hebrew is Ki asa, for he has done it. He has accomplished it. Jesus brackets his entire crucifixion inside one psalm. His first words from the cross quote the opening, my God, his final cry, tetelestai, it is finished, echoes the closing, Ki asa, he has done it. He framed his death inside a psalm that moves from abandonment to triumph, not despair. A victory psalm spoken from the bottom of the valley by a man who could already see the other side. He was not crying out in confusion. He was preaching a sermon with his last breaths. And the sermon was Psalm 22. And the congregation did not understand, because some of the bystanders thought he was calling for Elijah. The Hebrew Eli, my God, sounds like Eliyahu, Elijah. They misheard the deepest theological cry in all of Scripture as a call for human rescue. At 3 in the afternoon, Jesus breathed his last. The exact hour when less than half a mile away in the temple courts, the Passover lambs began their slaughter. The timing is not symbolic. It is calendrical. John's Gospel positions the crucifixion on the day of preparation when the lambs were killed. The Lamb of God expired at the precise hour the Levitical lambs began to bleed. And at that moment, the veil of the temple tore. The veil that separated the holy place from the most holy place. The inner chamber where God's presence dwelled. The room only the high priest entered once a year on the Day of Atonement. The Mishnah describes this curtain as approximately 60 feet tall and a handbreadth thick. Josephus says it was a massive Babylonian tapestry embroidered with a panorama of the heavens. 300 priests were needed to handle it when it required washing. And it tore. From top to bottom. Not from the bottom, as if torn by human hands. From the top, 60 feet above the floor, as if an invisible hand reached down and opened what had been closed for 1,000 years. And the temple knew. In the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Yoma 39b, a Jewish source with absolutely no Christian motivation, the rabbis recorded that 4 anomalous signs began occurring in the temple approximately 40 years before its destruction in 70 CE. That places the onset at roughly 30 CE, the year of the crucifixion. The signs were these. The lot for the Yom Kippur scapegoat, which had previously favored the right hand, ceased coming up on the right. The crimson thread tied to the scapegoat, which had turned white as a sign of forgiveness, stopped turning white. The western lamp of the menorah, which was always kept burning, began extinguishing itself, and the massive temple doors swung open on their own. Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai rebuked the temple itself. "O temple, temple, why do you alarm yourself? I know that you will ultimately be destroyed." The sacrificial system appeared to malfunction at the exact historical moment Christians claim the final sacrifice was made, and the source that recorded it was not Christian. It was the Talmud. 4 signs, 40 years, a hostile source with no reason to fabricate, and the timing lands precisely where the Gospels place the cross. Sometimes the most powerful confirmation comes from the people who had every reason to deny it. At the foot of the cross, a Roman centurion has been watching for hours. He has overseen crucifixions before. He has watched men die slowly, cursing, begging, losing control of their bodies. He has never watched a man die like this. He has heard the prayer of forgiveness. He has watched the darkness descend at noon. He has felt the ground shake. And now, looking up at the body of a man he helped execute, he says something that could cost him his career, his freedom, or his life. Truly, this man was the Son of God. In the Roman Empire, the title Son of God belonged to one person, Caesar, Divi Filius, the emperor's exclusive claim. For a Roman soldier on duty at a state execution, to transfer that title from Caesar to a crucified Jewish criminal was an act closer to treason than to theology. Mark has structured his entire gospel so that no human being correctly identifies Jesus as Son of God until this moment. And the first person to say it is not a disciple, not a priest, a pagan soldier standing at the cross. Mark's theological point is precise. You cannot understand who Jesus is by watching his miracles. You can only understand who Jesus is by watching him die. What happens next is quiet. The shouting is over. The darkness has lifted. The crowds have gone home. beating their chests. Two men step forward, both members of the Sanhedrin, the very council that condemned Jesus hours earlier. Joseph of Arimathea, whom Mark describes as a respected member of the council who had not consented to their decision, and Nicodemus, who first came to Jesus at night in secret in John chapter 3. At the moment of maximum danger, when every public disciple has fled, two secret disciples emerge into the open. The cross, which scattered the brave, has drawn out the hidden. Joseph goes to Pilate and asks for the body. Mark uses the Greek verb etolmesen. He took courage, requesting the body of a man executed for sedition during the Passover festival in a city under martial surveillance is an act of extraordinary risk. Roman practice often left the crucified unburied, exposed on the wood as a public warning. Joseph puts his name, his wealth, and his standing on the line for a dead man. Nicodemus brings the burial spices. John records the amount: 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes. This is not a normal burial quantity. A normal family used perhaps a few handfuls. 75 pounds was a royal burial, the kind reserved for kings. When King Asa died, the chronicler records that they laid him on a bier full of spices. Nicodemus is burying Jesus as a king. They take the body down. They wrap it in clean linen. They work the myrrh and aloes into the folds of the cloth, layer by layer. The fragrance of the spices fills the cool air inside the tomb. The weight of the burial wrappings grows. The body is settled onto the stone shelf of a new tomb, hewn from rock, a tomb that belongs to Joseph himself, a tomb that fulfills, down to the last detail, the words of Isaiah. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, executed as a criminal, buried as a king. The prophecy required both. They roll the stone across the entrance. It is a large disc-shaped stone set in a carved channel. Only 4 tombs in first-century Jerusalem have been found with circular rolling stones, and 3 of those were associated with royalty. The next morning, the chief priests go to Pilate. They remember that Jesus predicted he would rise after 3 days. They ask for a guard. Pilate grants their request. Roman soldiers take their position at the entrance. A cord is stretched across the stone and affixed with stamped wax, the official seal of the Roman Empire. Breaking a Roman seal is punishable by death. Every precaution has been taken. The guard, the seal, the stone. And every precaution has inadvertently made what happens next more inexplicable, not less. The body is in the tomb. The linen is wrapped. The spices are pressed into the cloth like a king's coronation robe. The stone is sealed. The guard is posted. And it is Friday evening. The sun is setting. The Sabbath is beginning. And nobody can do anything until it passes. If you are still awake, let this image settle. A quiet garden, a sealed tomb, the fragrance of myrrh and aloes drifting through stone. And somewhere in Jerusalem, a handful of people who loved him are sitting in the dark, not knowing that Sunday is coming. They only know that he is gone. The body is in the tomb. The stone is rolled. The seal is placed. And tomorrow is the most overlooked day in all of Christianity. the day between death and resurrection, the day nobody knew Sunday was coming. The women who followed him are preparing spices, but they cannot go to the grave because the law requires them to rest. They have watched someone die, and they cannot even visit his body until the Sabbath is over. That silence, that waiting, that not knowing is where the story pauses tonight. Saturday. The women prepared spices, but could not go to the tomb because of the Sabbath. Imagine that. You have watched someone die. You have held the perfume and the linen. You have everything you need to care for the body, and you cannot go because the law requires you to rest. Luke records it in a single verse. Chapter 23, verse 56. They rested on the Sabbath in obedience to the commandment, one of the most devastating sentences in all of Scripture, not because of what it says, because of what it costs. These women obeyed a commandment to rest on the worst day of their lives. They sat in their homes with spices on the table and grief in their chests, and they did not move. The Sabbath that week was a double Sabbath. John calls it a high day because Passover and the weekly Sabbath fell together. Twice holy, twice still, twice silent. And so Jerusalem was quiet. The temple courts that had been running with the blood of 250,000 lambs the day before were washed clean. The street where the crowds had screamed, "Crucify him," was empty. The hill where 3 crosses had stood was bare. Everything that had been noise and fury and violence was now just wind moving through empty spaces. Think about what Saturday felt like for the people who loved him. Peter is somewhere in Jerusalem. We do not know where. We know that the last time the Gospel showed him, he was weeping in a dark street after the rooster crowed. He has not spoken since. Somewhere in this city, a man who swore he would die for Jesus is sitting with the knowledge that he did not even stand beside him. Mary, his mother, is breathing. That is all we can say with certainty. She watched her firstborn son die the worst death the Roman Empire could design. She heard him entrust her care to the beloved disciple. 33 years earlier, Simeon held her infant son in the temple and told her, "A sword will pierce your own soul also." Saturday is the day the sword is all the way through. The beloved disciple has taken Mary into his home. He is providing for her, as Jesus asked. But what does that first evening look like? 2 people in a room, one who lost a son and one who lost a teacher, trying to eat, trying to breathe, with silence filling every corner of the house. And here is the detail that makes Saturday unbearable. They did not know Sunday was coming. We read the story with resurrection already in our hands. We turn the page and the tomb is empty. But they could not turn the page. For the disciples, Saturday was not the day before Easter. It was the day after the end. Everything they had believed for 3 years, every miracle they had witnessed, every promise he had made, lay behind a sealed stone guarded by Roman soldiers. Yes, he had told them. 3 times in the Gospels, Jesus predicted his resurrection. The Son of Man must be killed, and after 3 days, rise again. They heard it. They did not understand it. Mark writes that they did not understand the saying and were afraid to ask him. Peter once rebuked Jesus for even speaking of death. They had the prophecy. They did not have the faith to hold it. That is what Saturday feels like. You may have promises you cannot believe, words spoken over your life that seem impossible now, a diagnosis that contradicts every prayer, a silence where there used to be a voice. The promises do not disappear, but on Saturday, they are buried under a stone you cannot move. If you are falling asleep right now, that is exactly right. Saturday is the day of rest. Even in grief, God said rest. The women who loved him most obeyed that commandment, and you can too. Let the story hold you. You do not need to stay awake for what comes next. The tomb is not going anywhere, and neither is the love that sealed you inside this moment. While the disciples hid behind locked doors, someone else remembered what Jesus had said. Matthew records that on Saturday morning, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. Their request, "Sir, we remember how that impostor said, while he was still alive, 'After 3 days, I will rise. Therefore order the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day, lest his disciples go and steal him away and tell the people, he has risen from the dead.'" Do you hear the irony? The enemies of Jesus remembered his promise about resurrection more clearly than his friends did. The Pharisees took it seriously enough to post a guard. The disciples were too shattered to even think about it. The very people who killed him were the ones who believed his words might come true. The people who loved him were the ones who had forgotten. And this is where the pattern begins to shimmer, gently, even in the darkness. Every precaution taken to prevent the resurrection inadvertently strengthened the evidence for it. The stone was rolled and sealed. A Roman guard was posted. The priests themselves verified the location and confirmed the body was inside. They created an airtight chain of custody, documented by the very people who had the most to lose if the tomb turned up empty. If the disciples had been left alone with an unguarded tomb, every skeptic in the history would say they stole the body. But the guards, the seal, the official request, the priestly inspection, all of it recorded by Matthew, removed that possibility. The enemies of the resurrection built the case for it. There is something almost gentle about that. In the middle of the worst day in the disciples' lives, when they were doing nothing, understanding nothing, believing nothing, God was quietly arranging the evidence, not for them, for everyone who would hear the story later, for you. And if you step back far enough, you begin to notice something else. A pattern running through the entire week, like a thread woven into the fabric. The number 3. Jesus predicted his death and resurrection 3 times. He prayed in Gethsemane 3 times. Peter denied him 3 times. 3 hours of darkness covered the land. 3 crosses stood on the hill. 3 days in the tomb. Saturday is the middle day. The second of 3, the hinge, the pause between the downbeat and the resolution. And the pattern of 3 is not accidental. It is the signature of a God who does things completely. 3 prayers to show the struggle was real. 3 denials to show the failure was total. 3 days to show the silence was necessary. Later, on the beach, Jesus will ask Peter 3 questions. Do you love me? 3 questions for 3 denials. 3 restorations for 3 failures. The pattern of grace mirrors the pattern of collapse. Nothing is wasted, not even the falling. The German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, writing from a Nazi prison cell in 1944, described God as the one who lets himself be pushed out of the world onto the cross. Bonhoeffer knew Saturday. He was living inside it. He had seen friends executed. He had heard the Allied bombs shaking the walls. He did not know if liberation would come. He did not know if he would survive. He was writing theology in the silence between a promise and a fulfillment he could not see. Months later, Bonhoeffer was hanged at Flossenburg, just days before the camp was liberated. His Sunday came. He did not live to see it in the way he expected. But the words he wrote from that cell have carried millions of people through their own Saturdays. The silence was not empty. It was a room where something was being composed that would outlast the prison, outlast the war, outlast the century. Holy Saturday is the ultimate expression of divine vulnerability. The creator of the universe lay in a borrowed tomb. The one who spoke light into existence was wrapped in linen in the dark. The one who breathed life into Adam's nostrils was not breathing. And if you have ever felt that God was absent, that your prayers hit the ceiling and stopped, that the silence was so thick you could not find any evidence of love, then you know what Saturday feels like. You are not outside the story. You are inside it. If tonight feels like a Saturday, if you are between a death and a dawn you cannot see, you are not alone. Every person who has ever loved has known this day. Every mother who has lost a child, every friend who has watched a diagnosis steal someone slowly, every person who has prayed and heard nothing back. Saturday is the space between promise and fulfillment, between the cross and the empty tomb, between what God said and what you can see. It is the space where faith lives most honestly, not because you can see the answer, but because you remember the voice of the one who promised. You are not in Friday's agony. You are not in Sunday's celebration. You are in the in-between. And the in-between is where most of life happens. Saturday is the truest day. The day you believe not because you have proof, but because you have nothing else to hold. The spices are on the table. The linen is folded. The women are waiting for the sun to set on Saturday, so they can walk to the tomb at first light on Sunday. Mark names them: Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Salome. They have purchased the spices, myrrh and aloes and fragrant oil, according to the custom. Jewish burial law required that the body be anointed within 3 days. The Sabbath had stolen the first day. They will go at dawn on the third. They do not know what they will find. They are preparing to anoint a dead body. They are bringing perfume for a corpse. They have no expectation of anything except grief and the small sacred act of caring for someone who can no longer care for himself. That is love on a Saturday. Showing up with what you have, expecting nothing, doing what your hands know how to do, preparing spices for a body that will not need them. These women are not theologians. They are not strategists. They are people who loved someone and want to touch his body one more time. That is the kind of love that survives Saturday. The tomb is sealed. The guard is posted. Every precaution has been taken. And every precaution has inadvertently strengthened the evidence for what happens next. The women are resting because the law told them to rest. The disciples are hiding because the world told them to fear. And the stone is exactly where it was placed, heavy cold, immovable. But Sunday is coming. They cannot see it. You cannot always see it either. And tonight, that is enough. Rest in the Saturday. God was not finished. He was only silent. And sometimes, the silence is where the deepest work is done. Mary went to the garden before dawn, and she met a man she assumed was the gardener. She was more right than she knew. John chapter 20, verse 1. While it was still dark, John has been building a pattern since the first chapter of his gospel. Light and darkness. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. When Judas left the upper room to betray Jesus, John wrote 3 words. It was night. When the soldiers came to arrest him in the garden, they carried lanterns and torches to find the light of the world. Now the light is about to break, but it has not broken yet. Mary Magdalene sets out while it is still dark, carrying spices she prepared on Friday, walking toward a tomb that she believes still holds the body of the man she followed across Galilee. The pre-dawn air is cold against her skin. The streets of Jerusalem are empty. The only sound is her own footsteps and the faint stirring of birds that do not yet know the sun is coming. She reaches the garden, and the stone is gone. Not shifted, not cracked, moved entirely. The mouth of the tomb gapes open in the half-light. Here is where a common misunderstanding needs to be corrected. The stone was not rolled away to let Jesus out. The resurrection body that would later walk through locked doors and appear in sealed rooms did not require a doorway. The stone was rolled away to let the witnesses in, to let them see the evidence, the empty wrappings, the folded cloth, the absence that would change everything. The stone was moved for Mary, not for Jesus. She runs back through the dark streets to find Peter and John. They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him. And then one of the most human details in all 4 Gospels. Peter and John run to the tomb, both of them running through Jerusalem at dawn. And John, who is writing this account decades later, records a detail that only an eyewitness would bother to mention. He outran Peter. He arrived first. He bent down and looked in. He saw the linen cloths lying there, but he did not go in. Peter arrived second. Peter went straight in. That is Peter entirely. The man who leaped out of a boat and sank. The man who drew a sword in a garden. The man who denied Jesus 3 times by a fire, and then ran to the tomb without hesitation. Peter enters first, because Peter always enters first. It is both his glory and his catastrophe. Inside, they find something strange. The linen wrappings are lying flat, as though the body simply passed through them, and the face cloth, the sudarian, is not with the other wrappings. It is folded, set apart, in a place by itself. There is a popular internet story that claims a folded napkin in Jewish culture was a signal from a master to his servants. I am coming back. The Jerusalem Perspective, a scholarly journal on Second Temple Judaism, investigated this claim and found no biblical or rabbinical source. It is a modern invention, a beautiful idea with no ancient evidence. The real significance is simpler and more powerful. If the body had been stolen, no thief would unwrap it first. No grave robber, working in darkness, terrified of Roman guards, would take the time to remove 75 pounds of hardened burial spices, neatly fold the face cloth, and arrange the linens before carrying a naked body through Jerusalem at night. The grave clothes are the evidence. Undisturbed, unhurried, a departure, not a theft. John records, "He saw and believed." The beloved disciple believed before he saw the risen Jesus. He believed because of what was not there. Peter and John leave, but Mary stays. She is standing outside the tomb, weeping. The Greek is kliousa, not quiet tears, audible grief, the kind of crying that bends your body and blurs your vision, the kind that means you have looked for someone and cannot find them. She bends down and looks into the tomb. 2 angels are sitting where the body had been, one at the head, one at the feet. They ask her a question. "Woman, why are you weeping?" She says, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." She turns. There is a man standing behind her in the garden. The dawn light is rising now through the trees. She cannot make out his face. He asks the same question. "Woman, why are you weeping? Who are you looking for?" She thinks he is the gardener. She says, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him." He says one word, "Mary." She turns fully, and she says one word back. In Aramaic, her own language, the language of childhood and prayer and love. Rabboni, not rabbi. Rabboni, the more intimate form, the personal, relational address that no formal student would use. The word a beloved would use for a beloved teacher. She does not recognize him by sight. She recognizes him by voice. This fulfills what he taught in John chapter 10. "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." Recognition comes not through evidence, but through the personal address. The Good Shepherd calling his own sheep by name. And here is the revelation that has been waiting since the first sentence of this chapter. Mary thought he was the gardener. John set this scene deliberately in a garden. John opened his entire gospel with "in the beginning," echoing Genesis chapter 1. Now, at the climax, the resurrection takes place in a garden, echoing Eden. The first Adam encountered God in a garden and brought ruin. The second Adam encounters the first witness in a garden and inaugurates new creation. Mary's mistake is, in the deepest sense, correct. He is the gardener, the divine gardener, the one who planted Eden, who walked with Adam in the cool of the day, who watched humanity exile itself from the garden, and who has now returned to plant again. The new creation begins, and it begins as the first creation began, in a garden. And here is something that should not be passed over quickly. In the first century, a woman's testimony was not admissible in a Jewish court of law. Josephus wrote that the testimony of women should not be accepted on account of the levity and boldness of their sex. If you were inventing a resurrection story to persuade a skeptical audience, you would never choose a woman as your first witness. You would choose Peter, or John, or one of the 12, a man whose word carried legal authority. But every gospel, without exception, names women as the first witnesses. All 4. This is what historians call the criterion of embarrassment. The early church preserved a detail that was damaging to their credibility because it was true. They did not select their witnesses. They reported what happened. And what happened was that the risen Christ appeared first to a woman weeping in a garden at dawn. Jesus tells Mary, "Go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." My brothers. Before the crucifixion, he called them disciples. He called them friends. He called them servants. But now, after the resurrection, after they abandoned him in the garden, after they fled and denied and hid, he calls them brothers. Their status has not been diminished by their failure. It has been elevated by his resurrection. The word is not accidental. He does not say servants. He does not say followers. He says brothers. The resurrection does not merely restore. It transforms. That same afternoon, two disciples are walking from Jerusalem to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles, a 2-hour walk on dusty roads in the late April sun. One is named Cleopas. The other is unnamed. They are talking about everything that has happened. Their voices carry the specific weight of people processing impossible grief. We had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. The past tense tells everything. We had hoped. We do not hope anymore. A stranger falls into step beside them. Luke records that their eyes were kept from recognizing him. A divine passive. God prevented recognition. Not because recognition was unimportant, but because understanding had to come first. They needed to hear the scriptures before they saw the person. And then Luke records what may be the most extraordinary Bible study ever given. Beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Beginning with Moses. Genesis. The seed of the woman who would crush the serpent's head. Abraham binding Isaac on the mountain. The Passover lamb whose blood marked the doorposts. The rock struck once in the wilderness. The bronze serpent lifted up in the desert. The prophet, like Moses, who would come. All the prophets. Isaiah's suffering servant, crushed for our iniquities, bearing our griefs. The shepherd struck, and the sheep scattered from Zechariah. The one pierced in Psalm 22, 1,000 years before crucifixion existed. Daniel, Son of Man, ascending to receive an everlasting kingdom. This is the thread we planted in chapter 2. Isaiah wrote those words 7 centuries before the cross. Every pre-Rashi Jewish commentator identified Isaiah chapter 53 as the Messiah. 3 hostile Jewish sources, none with any Christian motive, converge. The pre-Rashi consensus that the servant was the Messiah. The Nichal Haver fragment preserving they pierced from approximately 50 CE. And the Talmudic charge of sorcery that confirms miracles by recharacterizing them. The scriptures concerning himself, not scattered proof texts. A unified story, running from Eden to Emmaus, in which every act of God pointed toward this week. They reach the village as evening falls. He makes as if to go further. They urge him, "Stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent." He sits with them at a table. He takes bread. He blesses it. He breaks it. He gives it to them. 4 actions. Took, blessed, broke, gave. The same 4 actions from the upper room 3 days earlier. The same 4 actions from the hillside where he fed 5,000. The pattern is unmistakable. And at the breaking of the bread, their eyes are opened. The Greek is precisely the same construction used in Genesis chapter 3, verse 7. In the Garden of Eden, the eyes of both were opened, and they knew shame. At Emmaus, their eyes were opened, and they knew salvation. Where eyes were first opened to sin, eyes are now opened to the risen Lord. The fall is being reversed. Eden is running backward. He vanishes from their sight. They sit at the table, holding broken bread, staring at the place where he was. And one of them says what both of them know. Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures? And now, one more thing that must be named. The resurrection body is something the world has never seen before. Jesus eats fish. He breaks bread. He can be touched. He has flesh and bones. Handle me and see, he tells the disciples in Luke chapter 24. For a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have. But this same body passes through locked doors. It appears and vanishes. It is not recognized by people who knew him well until he chooses to be recognized. Paul calls this a soma pneumatikon, a spiritual body, not a body made of spirit, but a physical body animated and transformed by the Spirit of God. He uses the analogy of a seed and a plant, continuity and radical transformation. The wounds remain. The scars are permanent. But the body is glorified, capable of things no body has been capable of before. This is what Paul calls the first fruits, the prototype, the first harvest of a new kind of existence, not a ghost, not a resuscitated corpse, something entirely new, the beginning of new creation. The garden was found. In 2025, archaeologists working beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre discovered traces of cultivated plants, their root systems preserved in 1st century limestone, dating to approximately spring of 33 CE. John chapter 19, verse 41. Now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden. There was a garden, and they found it, right where John said it would be. A garden at dawn. A voice saying a name. Bread broken at a table as the last light fades. A heart burning on a long road home. These are the textures of the morning. Not thunder and earthquakes, though Matthew records those too. But the moments that changed everything are quieter than that. A woman weeping. A single word. Broken bread. Open eyes. The new creation does not arrive with a shout. It arrives the way all mornings arrive. Slowly. Gently. 1 degree of light at a time. And then, before you realize it has happened, the darkness is gone. He is alive, but not everyone has seen him yet. A week from now, one man will demand to put his fingers in the wounds, and Jesus will let him. A week after the resurrection, Thomas is still demanding proof. The other disciples have seen Jesus. They have told Thomas, and Thomas has responded with the most honest sentence in the Gospels. Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe. He is not being cynical. He is being precise. He wants what the others already have. He wants to see for himself. And for 7 days, the answer is silence. 7 days of the others knowing something Thomas does not. 7 days of them looking at him with a glow he cannot share. 7 days of wondering if grief has finally broken them, or if something has happened that breaks everything else. The word we have given Thomas for 2,000 years is doubting. Doubting Thomas. But that word does not appear in the text. What Jesus actually says to him in the Greek is me ginu apistos ala pistos. Do not become unbelieving, but believing. It is a process, not a verdict. Jesus is not condemning a character flaw. He is inviting a transition. And when Thomas answers, he does not say, I believe now. He says something far more extraordinary. He says, Ho Kyrios mokai, ho Theos mu. My Lord and my God. This is the highest Christological confession in any of the 4 Gospels. As the scholar Gerald Borchert noted, it brings John's Gospel full circle. The first chapter opens, In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. The 20th chapter closes with a man touching wounds and arriving at the same conclusion through his fingers. Where Caesar was hailed as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, Thomas takes the empire's highest title and gives it to a man with nail holes in his hands. The doubter makes the greatest declaration of faith in the entire New Testament. Jesus does not rebuke the need for evidence. He fulfills it. He holds out his hands. He says, Put your finger here. Then he adds a sentence that reaches across 20 centuries to everyone who was not in that room. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Thomas is not doubting Thomas. He is honest Thomas. He needed evidence. Jesus honored that need. And then he pronounced a blessing on a different path to the same destination. Sometime later, 7 of the disciples go fishing. Peter says, I am going fishing, and the others follow. It is the Sea of Galilee. The water is dark. The nets come up empty. They fish all night and catch nothing. At dawn, a figure stands on the shore. They cannot see his face. The light is behind him. Children, do you have any fish? No. Cast the net on the right side of the boat. They cast it, and the net fills so heavily they cannot haul it in. 153 fish. John recognizes him first. He whispers to Peter, It is the Lord. Peter does not wait for the boat to reach shore. He throws himself into the water and swims. When Peter reaches the beach, dripping, breathless, there is a fire. Not a bonfire, not a cooking pit, a charcoal fire. The Greek word is anthrakia, and the smell of it would have stopped Peter where he stood, because anthrakia appears only twice in the entire New Testament. The first time was in John chapter 18, in the courtyard of the high priest, where Peter denied knowing Jesus 3 times while warming his hands over a charcoal fire. The smoke, the heat on his face, the flickering light catching the eyes of the servant girl who asked, Are you not one of this man's disciples? I am not. 3 times? By a charcoal fire. Now Jesus has built another one. Same word, same smell, same warmth on the skin. the smoke curling the same direction in the early morning air. Jesus did not avoid the sight of Peter's worst memory. He recreated it. He walked Peter straight back into the sensory landscape of his greatest failure. But this time, there is bread. There is fish. There is breakfast. This is the most intimate scene in the entire Passion narrative. The God of the universe, risen from death, kneeling by a charcoal fire, cooking fish for the man who denied knowing him. After breakfast, Jesus turns to Peter, and he asks a question that undoes everything. "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? More than these? More than the boats? More than the nets? More than the fish? More than the old life you just went back to? Do you love me more than everything you can touch?" Peter says, "Yes, Lord. You know that I love you." Jesus says, "Feed my lambs." He asks again, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter says, "Yes, Lord. You know that I love you." Jesus says, "Tend my sheep." He asks a third time, and Peter is grieved, not because the question is repeated, but because it is repeated 3 times. One question for each denial. The structure is therapeutic. It is surgical. 3 wounds require 3 healings. 3 collapses by 1 fire answered by 3 commissions beside another. Peter says, with all the broken honesty a man can carry, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus says, "Feed my sheep." In the Greek text, scholars have long debated whether the verb Jesus uses for love shifts between the questions. Twice Jesus says, agapao, the word for self-giving, covenantal love. Peter responds each time with phileo, the word for deep friendship, for personal affection. The third time, Jesus switches to Peter's word. He comes down to where Peter is. D.A. Carson, Leon Morris, Craig Blomberg, and Darrell Bach, representing the mainstream scholarly consensus, argue that John uses these 2 verbs interchangeably elsewhere in the Gospel. The narrative power does not depend on resolving the linguistic question. What matters is what is visible to any reader in any language. 3 questions to heal 3 denials. 3 commissions to restore 1 calling. And notice, the 3 commissions are not identical. Feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. Feed my sheep. 3 different Greek words. Boske, poimen, boski. Feed, shepherd, feed. Arnia, probata, probata. Lambs, sheep, sheep. Jesus is not repeating himself. He is giving Peter a complete pastoral charge, from the young to the mature, from nourishing to protecting to nourishing again. The man who could not stand beside a fire without falling apart is now entrusted with the entire flock. Consider what did not happen. Judas also failed. Judas also felt the weight of what he had done. Matthew records that Judas returned the 30 pieces of silver and confessed, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." He knew. The Greek word Matthew uses for Judas's regret is metamelomai, a change of feeling, a sorrow that turns inward and collapses. Peter's word is metanoia, a change of mind, a sorrow that turns outward and runs toward the one it wronged. The difference between Judas and Peter was not the size of the sin. It was the direction of the grief. One ran away from the fire. The other threw himself into the water and swam toward it. The smell of failure became the smell of breakfast with God. The fire that witnessed the worst night of Peter's life now witnesses the morning that remade it. If you have ever failed, if you have ever denied something you knew was true because you were afraid, if you have ever stood by a fire and wished you could take it back, the charcoal fire burns for you too, not as punishment, as invitation. Come and have breakfast. Each gospel writer records the final commission differently, and each emphasis reveals something the others do not. Matthew places it on a mountain. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. The scope is total, not just Israel, every nation. Luke places it in the context of Scripture. Beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus opened their minds to understand. Everything written about him in the law and the prophets and the Psalms had to be fulfilled. Mark says, "Go into all the world and proclaim the good news to every creature." The simplest, the widest, every creature. And John frames it as a new creation. Jesus breathes on the disciples, and the Greek verb John uses is emphysao. It appears in only one other place in all of Greek scripture. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. When God breathed into Adam's nostrils the breath of life. The resurrection is not merely a return. It is a new beginning. The same breath that animated the first human now animates the new humanity. Then he ascended. Acts records it simply. A cloud took him out of their sight. But the cloud is not weather. In the Hebrew scriptures, the cloud is the Shekinah, the visible presence of God. The cloud that filled the tabernacle so thickly that Moses could not enter. The cloud that settled on Solomon's temple. And in Daniel chapter 7, the Son of Man comes to the Ancient of Days with the clouds of heaven and receives an everlasting kingdom. The ascension is not a departure. It is a coronation. The Son of Man ascending, not descending. Coming to the throne, not leaving the earth. Daniel saw it from below. The disciples watched it from the same angle. And Luke, who tells us more about this moment than any other writer, adds one detail that changes everything. They worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy. Not grief, joy. The people who watched him leave were not mourning. They were celebrating because they understood. The man who had been crucified, buried, and raised was now enthroned, and his kingdom would have no end. Whether you heard every word tonight or only a few, the story is finished. The week that began with a donkey in the dust has ended with a throne in the clouds. The parade is over. The table is cleared. The tomb is empty. The fire has burned down to embers. And the angel said to the disciples, staring up into the sky, "Why do you stand looking into heaven? This Jesus, who was taken up from you into heaven, will come in the same way as you saw him go. He is not gone. He is reigning. And the promise he made on that mountain in Galilee holds. It held for Peter, who failed and was restored. It held for Thomas, who doubted and was met with evidence. It held for the women who came to the garden in the dark, and heard their name spoken by someone they thought was the gardener. I am with you always, to the end of the age. Tonight, as you rest, that promise holds. It holds in the dark. It holds when the room is quiet and the thoughts are loud. It holds when you cannot see what morning will bring. It holds for the one who has failed spectacularly and needs to hear that failure is not the final word. It holds for the one who has doubted honestly and needs to know that questions are met with open hands, not closed fists. It held for women who came to a garden before dawn and were told not to be afraid. It held for 2 travelers on a road to Emmaus who recognized him in the breaking of bread. It held for 500 people at once who saw him and lived to tell others for decades. The last image I want you to carry into sleep is not a cross. The cross is finished. It is not a tomb. The tomb is empty. The last image is breakfast. A charcoal fire on a lakeshore. The sky turning from gray to gold. Fish and bread. Smoke rising in the still morning air. And a voice that knows every denial, every doubt. Every night you have spent wondering whether any of this is real. Every morning you have woken up and tried again. That voice does not wait for you to be ready. It does not wait for you to get it right. It builds a fire. It cooks breakfast. It calls across the water. Come and eat. You are known. You are loved. You are not too late. The story that began with a parade ends with a promise. The promise is not that the road will be easy or that the night will always be short. The promise is that you will never walk it alone. Close your eyes now. The fire is warm. The bread is broken. And He is with you to the end of the age. Rest.